Chapter 99. There's no escaping it. The runes on the door began to shift, crawling along the stone and lifting off to hang in the air, rearranging themselves into a new pattern. The stone door slid open soundlessly. Beyond it lay a space filled with gray mist, so thick it seemed almost solid, slowly churning. Through the haze, one could barely make out the silhouettes of ruined buildings, toppled columns, collapsed arches, and fragments of floorboards scattered like shattered tiles. Everything was blurred, edges melting together under that dull pall. A shimmering magical barrier still spanned the doorway. It was translucent, like condensed light, with silver-white runes pulsing across its surface at a steady rhythm. The barrier held the gray mist fast. The fog lapped at the membrane, but could not pass. Darren stared at it with a look that was part devotion and part terror. He slid the crystal back into its box, drew his wand, and pointed its tip at the center of the barrier. He began to chant an incantation, longer and more complex than before. Each syllable sounded like it was being wrested from him. His face drained of color so quickly it seemed to pale in stages, from pallid to ghastly to chalk white. The hand that gripped his wand shook violently, the tip describing a jerky, interrupted trail in the air, yet he did not stop. The silver-white runes along the barrier sputtered. Their light faltered, paling from silver to off-white, and then to a dull gray. Regulus narrowed his eyes and focused his magic perception on the seam between the shield and the mist. The barrier was weakening. Darren, with his incantation, was trying to persuade it, to force its defensive logic to falter, to make it think opening now was reasonable. The process crawled along. Every second felt stretched thin. The air in the passage grew colder. Regulus recognized the change in the ambient magic, like stepping from spring into the polar night. A cursed aura seeped through the barrier's weak points, faint but unmistakable. It was the same taint he had felt inside Hermes, only 1,000-fold stronger, an ocean against a droplet. Darren reached the end of his chant. As the last syllable fell from his lips, his knees buckled. He almost went down, but shoved the wand forward until its tip touched the barrier. The shield turned completely clear, revealing the churning gray mist beyond. Regulus realized with a jolt that it was no mist at all. It was a mass of illusory human faces, twisted beyond humanity, mouths ripped open as if forever screaming, eyes mere black hollows. Tens of thousands of them packed, layered, and compressed behind the barrier, each one a silent scream. Regulus's breath caught. How could such a thing exist inside Hogwarts? This was not the work of the righteous. If each face represented a lost life, did this place hold tens of thousands of the dead? The barrier remained in place, but its protective force had vanished. Regulus tamped down his questions and already moved into a retreating stance. Darren took a step forward, raised his wand, its tip glowing dark red, and prepared to cast again. Then the mist did something terrifying. It contracted, sucking inward until it became a dense, black knot that held together like a single thing. For one heartbeat it hung, then it exploded. A gray-black shockwave slammed into the barrier. The shield shuddered and spidered with cracks that raced across its surface, scaling the entire pane in the blink of an eye. Darren was thrown backward. His wand flew from his hand and smashed against the passage wall with a sharp crack. His eyes widened until the pupils were pinpricks. His mouth opened in a soundless scream. The fissures widened. A dirty gray seeped from the cracks. The first tendril of mist touched the hem of Darren's robe, turning the black fabric gray before it crumbled into powder that fell away like ash. Ah! Darren's scream finally burst free, raw and animal. He scrambled back in terror, his foot catching on the stone threshold. He fell, palms skidding across the floor, skin torn and bleeding, dark streaks in the dust. He fumbled for his wand, now broken into two pieces, but his fingers shook too hard to grasp them. More of the mist poured out, flowing toward him and leaving scorched, corroded marks wherever it passed. The barrier split and collapsed. Regulus's curiosity snapped into sharp alarm. The faces in the churned vapor radiated a bone-deep horror, despair and pain so heavy it needed no deliberate perception to be felt. It pressed into him through the air and weighed on his chest until his breaths grew shallow. With a quick motion, he dispelled his disillusionment charm and cast a revealing charm on both Avery and Alex. Their invisibility faded at once. the two of them standing stiff and pale in the dim light. Hiding their tracks now was pointless. What mattered was that they could see one another clearly. Evacuating fast was the only option. This had ceased to be a search and become a full retreat. Regulus looked at Darren McNeil, sprawled on the floor, clutching his broken wand and waving the halves with a face of absolute despair. A fool, reckless and stupid. Darren had prepared only to break the protective spell. He had no plan to contain or suppress whatever lay beyond. Could the higher-ups have meant for them to detonate this device inside Hogwarts? Voldemort? But that seemed crude. If Voldemort had dared such a thing, would he not fear Dumbledore hunting him down? The simplest explanation was the dumbest one. Darren had been foolish. The thought flashed and was gone as Regulus bolted for the passage exit, spitting one urgent word behind him. Run. Avery stood rooted, pale and shaking, his fingers still clenched around his wand. At Regulus's command he moved, following instinct and Regulus's lead without hesitation. Alex, however, was frozen, legs like lead, breath coming in ragged gasps, eyes wide with terror. Regulus and Avery had taken 3 steps when Regulus glanced back and saw Alex still there. He didn't look twice. He flicked his left wrist and launched a seizing charm. The seizing charm, designed for catching gnomes, closed about Alex's waist. Regulus gave a sharp tug, hauling the boy along to his side while his right hand seized Alex's arm. Regulus was physically stronger than a boy. Even while Avery ran his hardest, he could not match Regulus's pace. Regulus threw another seizing charm and pulled Avery along as well, then flung a shield charm behind them. The barrier was thick and solid, spanning the center of the passage to blunt the first wave. He followed with 2 impedimenta at the stone walls on either side. Loose masonry toppled and formed a crude barricade. The gray mist advanced faster than any of them had expected. Darren's terrified wail echoed from behind, high and hollow. Regulus's eyes swept back. The spot Darren had occupied was already drowned in the fog, save for a pinprick of white light that blinked defiantly, the crystal tied to the same warding source as the door's shield. Cracks crawled across its surface. How long it could hold was anyone's guess. That mattered little to Regulus. His only goal was to get Avery and Alex out. He cast a levitation charm on the 3 of them. They did not float away, but their effective weight was reduced, easing their flight through the passage. They rushed forward, the mist at their heels like a second shadow. The rubble barricade was meaningless. The gray rolled over it and swallowed the stones. Regulus ran without pause, calculating distance and speed as the corridor narrowed ahead to a single-file stretch. Only one person could pass at a time. There was no alternative route. They would have to slow to go through, and the mist would not give them that time. Regulus reached a bleak conclusion as his feet pounded the stone. At this speed, they would not make it. Chapter 100, My Guardian Angel, Appear! Avery was being dragged forward by Regulus. Cold sweat slid from his temples to his chin. He clenched his teeth so hard he could feel them grind together. He was only an 11-year-old wizard, and the scene before him was beyond his comprehension, eerie, terrifying. Fear prickled all over him. Yet he was heir to the House of Casbert, and that identity was the strongest thing he had. He could feel fear, but he could not let it take control. Ahead was the entrance to a narrow passage, a pitch-black opening that gaped like the maw of some creature. Rushing in would slow them down. The gray fog behind them would catch up. He said nothing. His face was pale, lips a thin line, brows knotted. He looked at Regulus's profile. His life was in Regulus's hands. Regulus was running much faster than Avery and Alex. If he let go of the grasping charm and broke the levitation charm now, both boys would be swallowed by the gray fog. The outcome could be deadly. No, worse, they might die. In Avery's eyes, Regulus was powerful and clear-headed. He always acted with purpose, thinking ahead, never making pointless moves. Speaking now would be meaningless. Begging or bargaining would be feeble. There was only one decision left for Regulus: bring them along into the passage or flee alone. Alex's condition was worse. His body shook violently, his teeth chattered, and incoherent whimpers escaped him. His head hung low. He dared not look back at the fog or forward into the dark. His legs felt like overcooked noodles. He moved mostly because the grasping charm dragged him. Regulus must have considered the option. Letting them go and running alone would be faster and increase the chance of outrunning the fog. From a coldly practical standpoint, it was the optimal solution. Discard the burden to preserve the core. He was the core. But Regulus did not let go. He held both charms. He had brought them into this danger. He had chosen to have them on this scouting mission. Having led others into peril, he would not abandon them halfway. This wasn't some naive moralism. He was not a saint. He had made pragmatic choices many times. Rather, it was a principle rooted deeper than immediate calculation, ingrained from a life that had been seen through, and he was not without contingency plans. There were countermeasures he could try. Fiendfire, a dark arts curse capable of consuming almost anything, should be effective against a curse like the gray fog. Using the siphon of natural magic, if he could treat the fog as pure negative magical energy, he might forcibly extract it through a siphon cycle and, by means of star orbit meditation, convert it into harmless energy. Theoretically feasible. In the worst case, he could use a forced spatial leap. The technique wasn't fully mature and could only teleport objects imprecisely, but if necessary, it could be used. All options carried risks. He had too few resources. Still, he chose not to abandon them. As he ran, Regulus's mind was racing. Could Dumbledore really not know something like this was buried beneath Hogwarts? As a first year, Regulus had pieced together clues, Hermes' injury, Darren's odd behavior, the traces at the scene, and found this place. The Hogwarts authorities couldn't possibly be unaware. Dumbledore, as headmaster, presided over the whole castle. It was hard to believe he knew nothing about a ticking curse bomb hidden beneath the school. Regulus thought of Dumbledore's habit. Friendly and lax outwardly, indifferent to petty squabbles, but appearing at critical moments to take control. Maybe Dumbledore had long known about the secret behind the stone door, maybe even knew about Darren's actions and this mission, and had simply been waiting for the right moment to intervene. Or maybe he'd been watching them now. Was he even the one who'd set this up? The thought steadied him. Even if Dumbledore had known, the decision now lay with Regulus. The gray fog was only 3 meters behind. Regulus decided without hesitation. The passage entrance was only 5 steps away. He stopped abruptly. The repelling charm slammed into Avery and Alex. Unprepared, they stumbled forward and landed at the very edge of the passage. Regulus planted himself where he stood, back to the 2 boys, facing the surging gray fog. His hand held his wand steady, without the slightest tremor. His voice was calm but resolute, full of the kind of authority that left no room for argument. "Run. I'll hold it. Go find a professor." Avery steadied himself. At those words, he whirled around. Shock flared across his face. His eyes widened so that his pupils contracted in the dim light. In the pure blood world, priorities were clear: survival, power, resources. Loyalty was transactional. He and Regulus had known each other less than a year, first as a family arrangement, then as a choice. Avery had come to believe in Regulus's ability and followed him. But he had never imagined Regulus would stay behind, alone, to face that lethal gray fog for his sake and Alex's. Regulus's expression did not change. His posture remained straight. He did not flinch from the overwhelming gray mass. In Avery's eyes, a boy his own age suddenly seemed different, older, firmer, nobler in a way he had not expected. Avery's lips moved. He wanted to say thank you, to say be careful, to say something, anything, but no sound came out. Alex had fallen onto the stone floor. His palms were scraped and bloody. He didn't seem to feel the pain. At the command, his eyes flooded with tears that splashed onto the floor, kicking up dust. He wanted to cry out, but fear tightened his throat into broken, muffled sobs. Avery grabbed Alex's wrist and hauled him up without looking back. He turned and plunged into the narrow passage, his feet nearly tripping from haste, and shouted just 2 words over his shoulder: "Keep up." Regulus closed his eyes. He sank his awareness inward, and the star orbit meditation unfolded in his mind, Orion's 4.5 stars lighting up one by one. He drew out a vast, tranquil starry imagery and wove it into a shield charm. The charm formed before him, a crystal-like barrier whose soft light belied a toughness like tempered glass. He called on the 5th star, Regal, the protector in Orion's pattern. Even if it was only the force of half a star, the intent of protection was strong and pure. A blue-white halo of Regal spilled from the tip of his wand, intertwining with the shield's light and peppering the barrier's surface with stardust. The shield thickened, enveloping him entirely. The gray fog struck the barrier. Sizzle! A corrosive, screeching sound split the passage. The barrier shuddered, ripples running over its surface, but it did not break. It held. The fog carried with it the echoes of despair and wails of agony. Those sounds pounded the shield again and again, eating at Regulus's magical energy. The starry sky imagery in his mind sharpened. Each star's light rotated in time with his energy cycle. The force of any single face in the fog was not enormous, but the number was infinite. One would shatter and be replaced immediately by another. Time stretched. The gray fog closed around the barrier, and through its translucence, countless faces materialized in Regulus's eyes, contorted features, gaping mouths, hollow sockets, each pouring centuries of pain outward, trying to drag the living into their despair. The voices crashed together into a single silent roar. Come, join us. Regulus's will did not break. Still, he could feel his limits approaching. The shield charm fused with the starry sky imagery burned through energy faster than any ordinary charm. The fog's onslaught had no end. Hundreds, thousands of faces hammered at the barrier every second. The shield's light dimmed, vibrations intensified, and fine cracks webbed across its surface like glass about to splinter. At that moment, something pure and warm surged from the center of his chest. It pierced through the restless, magical energy inside him, traveled down his arm, and burst from his wand. A dazzling silver-white light exploded from its tip and quickly condensed into the outline of a bird. Wings unfurled, tail feathers fanned, and silver-white plumage scattered fine starlight. His Patronus, starry sky kite, blazed into being. The starry sky kite coalesced out of the light, scattering fine motes of starlight as its wings unfurled, and it circled Regulus once. He had not intended to summon a Patronus. When the crisis reached a certain pitch, something inside him, this hunger for freedom and exploration, answered on its own. The creature raised its head and gave a clear, melodious cry that echoed down the narrow passage. Every twisted face trapped in the gray mist froze at once. A Patronus that fed on starlight and traversed space was itself a denial of blockades and restraint. As the kite's body, composed of pure positive 20, swept past, the gray mist shivered, an instinctive recoil at a natural predator. The Patronus did not attack aggressively. It simply flew into the mist, weaving through the crowded faces. Silver-white wings sliced through the fog, leaving trails of light. Any face touched by those trails vanished instantly, leaving no black smoke or residue, as if it had never existed. Regulus watched it work. The kite moved back and forth like a leisurely swimmer, each wing beat scattering starlight. The faces shrank away, but the passage was narrow, and they pressed and piled against one another with nowhere to flee. This was the essence of the Patronus charm, a manifestation of pure, positive feeling that naturally countered the negative 20. The despair and pain condensed into the gray mist dissolved visibly where the starlight fell. He remembered the state of mind that had called this Patronus, the yearning for a vast world, the persistence toward the essence of freedom. That longing itself cut through despair. The starry sky kite's nature, feeding on starlight and penetrating space, let it touch the core of the negative without brute force. Its presence alone undermined the faces, which were founded on anguish. Where the starlight reached, they crumbled like sandcastles on a weak foundation. The Patronus circled around the perimeter of the shield charm's barrier, its light wings clearing the gray mist wherever they swept. The pressure on the barrier eased, and Regulus used the respite to study the field. Then he noticed a problem. Faces that the starry sky kite had dissipated reformed from deeper inside the gray mist within a few breaths, as if conjuring themselves out of nothing. He focused on the nearest face. It disintegrated under the starlight, but 3 seconds later, the same facial features reappeared elsewhere in the mist. The kite was only removing symptoms. If the source remained, the faces could regenerate indefinitely, and the source was inside the stone door. He steadied the shield charm, thickening the barrier, but the drain on his twent was constant. With each wave of assault, the barrier weakened slightly, and he had to replenish it. The starry sky kite's presence also taxed his mind. If the drain continued, collapse was only a matter of time. He noticed another detail. The faces reacted strongly to the scent of a living person. They surged toward the barrier, mouths open, empty sockets fixed on him. What did they crave? Vitality? Fresh emotions? Existence itself? These creations condensed from pain showed an instinct to assimilate the living, as if they needed new life to fill their void and drag others into the same torment. A while had passed. Avery and Alex should have cleared the passage by now. If the Phi-19s had been aware, they ought to have met. If not, the two could find Professor Slughorn quickly. He didn't pin his hopes entirely on them. In the worst case, he would break out alone. At worst, he'd burn the place down. Before committing to that, though, there was still a chance. At a thought, the starry sky kite answered. It beat its wings furiously outside the barrier and unleashed a curtain of silver radiance that cleared all gray mist within 10 meters. Faces evaporated in the light. The passage returned, briefly, to clarity. The silver-white figure flashed, then vanished. Regulus calculated fast. The kite's clearing combined with the reinforced shield would buy him roughly a minute. Within that time, the barrier could still hold. He drew up a plan. If the starry sky kite couldn't find the source and the 19s didn't arrive, he would prepare an escape. Space leap was the last resort. As long as he didn't jump backward or smash into the stone, the other risks were tolerable. Spatial friction would tear at his body, but with his current constitution and the shield charm's protection, he could survive a brief ripping. Painful, but survivable. Whether the 18 damage from Space Leap was like apparition or whether 6 would mitigate it, he hadn't had the chance to test. Fiendfire was ready too. If control failed, he would incinerate whatever needed burning. He was only 12. If he had just one more year, he thought, he might handle this with more composure. But thought was useless now. Everything was set. He only had to wait for the Patronus. The cracks in the barrier began to spider again. The gray mist surged back, faces denser than before, layered so thick they nearly covered the whole surface. They opened their mouths in silent roars. Their despair punched at the barrier and aimed straight for Regulus's mind. Star orbit meditation ran at full capacity. His mental defenses absorbed most of the blow, but the pressure remained, as if a physical weight pressed on his chest. 30 seconds went by. The starry sky kite had not returned. He no longer hesitated and prepared to space leap. Fiendfire hovered at the ready. Just as he was about to cast, a cheerful cry rang in his mind, the Patronus triumphant. Regulus's thoughts snapped into place. The 20 for the space leap was held at a knife's edge when he felt something settle lightly on his left shoulder. He turned. The starry sky kite was perched there, meeting his gaze. Deep within its eyes, a color much like his own, was a whole field of stars reflecting the environs. An excited light flickered there. The shifting starlight seemed almost alive. In its beak, the Patronus held a shaft-like object. A thin layer of silver radiance wrapped the haft, but its nature was visible. Black walnut wood marked with corrosion, its surface pitted with uneven patterns like dried blood, giving it a dull sheen. In the center of the shaft was an embedded piece of hard, unknown material encased by the grain, only a pale yellow edge visible. Regulus felt the interior of the object as if it were a wound. Inside it swirled a vortex of feelings, countless emotions of despair and pain churning together, the mists, the faces. The final agonies of life and the resentment of death had been sealed inside this 21. He began to experience flashes, joints crushed, skin seared, organs rotting. The hallucinations were so vivid that he grimaced. He understood. This was the wellspring. All that condensed pain overflowed from this object. When a face was destroyed, the magical link led back to the 21 and the face reformed. He had never heard of a 21 so dependent on negative 20 that it could autonomously spawn assaults. It was like a living vessel of pain, venting darkness accumulated over centuries. Whoever had set this up, whether to seize the 21 or to wreak havoc at Hogwarts, didn't matter. If he destroyed it, the attack would end. He opened his left hand. A ball of blazing white fire rose from his palm, the heat warping the air. He could not destroy intangible negative entities, but a physical object was another matter. The starry sky kite blinked, its long tail feathers brushing his neck, then released its beak. The 21 fell toward the flame. Just as the tip neared the fire, a hand reached out from the side and caught the shaft between two fingers. There were no spatial ripples, no magical shivers, just a hand that seemed to have been there the whole time, unnoticed until then. Regulus's pupils narrowed. Albus Dumbledore stood beside him, inside the shield charm, dressed in deep purple pajamas patterned with stars and a matching dressing gown thrown over them. His silver hair and beard were slightly rumpled, as if he had only just gotten out of bed. In his other hand, he held an empty teacup, a smear of honey glinting on the rim. He lifted the 21 to his eyes, squinted for a moment as if making an identification. Then, with a casual flick of his wrist, the object vanished. Dumbledore turned to Regulus, blue eyes kind behind half-moon spectacles. Regulus forced his breathing steady and let the fire in his palm die. The starry sky kite remained on his shoulder, tilting its head at the headmaster, curiosity bright in its silver-gray eyes. "Good evening, Headmaster Dumbledore," Regulus said, inclining his head slightly. His voice was more hurried than usual. When Regulus saw Dumbledore standing there, he felt it was almost inevitable. He wasn't shocked. Hermes's injury, Darren's actions, the curse behind the stone door, taken together, Dumbledore's arrival here felt like a matter of course. For a moment, a thought crossed his mind. Had all of this been arranged? Was Hermes wounded on purpose to see if he would follow through? He tossed the notion aside as pointless. Even if it were true, what could he do about it? Confront the headmaster? Pretend not to know? Neither option made sense, so he let it go. Tonight's exertion had been far beyond ordinary. It hadn't been the number of spells, the shield charm had held from the start, and the starry sky kite had only appeared at the very end. The greater drain was cumulative. Faces had crashed against him one after another. With every impact, the shield charm had to burn magic to absorb the shock. There was also mental erosion. The despair and pain embedded in each face tainted the barrier, trying to seep into his mind along the flow of magic. He had to keep injecting pure energy to purify, replenish, and maintain the shield. It was far more exhausting than a duel with Orion. A duel was power against power, consumption visible and measurable. Tonight was a steady bleed, like thousands of tiny cuts draining him at once. Star orbit meditation ran at its limit just to keep up with the magical drain, and on the mental level, he had to sustain a constant barrier. Any lapse could have let the negative magic in. Still, he had not let the defenses drop. The shield charm remained active, and the starry sky kite perched on his shoulder. Its silver-white glow lit the area, and the gray mist recoiled from the light, unwilling to approach. Dumbledore blinked, a gentle smile at the corners of his mouth. He raised his right hand, index finger pointing up, and a ball of light kindled at his fingertip. It was soft, not blinding, like the first stream of sunlight through morning clouds. The light spread outward like water across the ground, and wherever it fell, the gray mist dissipated. The faces melted away silently, as if they had never been. The light reached the stone door, then returned like an echo, condensing at Dumbledore's fingertip into a warm, glowing orb the size of a pigeon's egg. Regulus felt his taut nerves loosen. The fatigue that had accumulated over the ordeal washed away like warm water. He let the shield charm fall. The pale blue, star-patterned barrier dissolved soundlessly. The starry sky kite tilted its head and let out a low cry, nuzzling his cheek with its beak. The warmth lingered a heartbeat before the Patronus dissolved into points of silver light and scattered on the breeze. "What a beautiful creature," Dumbledore said, looking after where the Patronus had been, genuine admiration in his eyes. "The starry sky kite, legendary magical creature that feeds on starlight and can pierce space. I did not expect it to be your Patronus." "Thank you for the praise, Headmaster," Regulus replied with a slight bow. "Your own Patronus is remarkable as well, a phoenix, reborn from its own flame and able to heal, one of the most coveted forms among witches and wizards." It didn't surprise Regulus that Dumbledore knew about the starry sky kite. Orion had warned him to hide it, but there had been no opportunity, nor strength to do so. And this was Dumbledore. If he saw it, he saw it. Dumbledore's face brightened. He stroked his beard. "It is delightful to be recognized by a young wizard," the headmaster said. "The phoenix is indeed extraordinary, though it can be mischievous and has on occasion made a mess of my office." He closed the light orb, then produced a pocket watch. The cover popped open, and he peered at the face. 12 minutes to 3, he said. "Strictly speaking, I should say good morning." Regulus merely met his gaze. "Have you been here all night, Headmaster?" "All night," Dumbledore answered plainly, blue eyes warm. "From the moment you entered the astronomy tower, I observed you move through the corridor and confront the gray mist. When you chose to stay behind and cover the retreat, I will admit I was a little surprised. Few first-year students can remain calm and willing to take such a risk for their companions." "Anyone capable would have done the same," Regulus said quietly. He had no desire for praise. Avery and Alex did not have the ability to handle that crisis. "I couldn't leave them." "That was not an easy decision," Dumbledore said. "To consider the safety of your classmates in a moment of danger and to willingly stay behind to cover them, those are commendable qualities. Many know in theory what should be done. Fewer act upon it when it matters." Dumbledore's hand reached out and patted Regulus's shoulder, warm and firm. "You are more mature than I expected, Mr. Black, and braver as well, and more excellent." Regulus bowed his head, embarrassed by the praise. But inside he repeated the words, mature, brave, excellent. There was an unspoken understanding between them. Neither pressed the other for explanations. Regulus did not ask why Dumbledore had hidden until the last moment. Dumbledore did not ask why Regulus had found the passage beneath the astronomy tower, or why he had not reported it to the professors sooner. The atmosphere between them was unusually harmonious. Dumbledore's smile was sincere, and the appreciation in his eyes was unmistakable. Crucially, Regulus felt no sign that his occlumency had been breached. Perhaps there had been a probing touch, but if so, he had not sensed it. Dumbledore was Dumbledore. If he had truly wanted to, he could have forced his way through. That he did not said as much as words. The headmaster's wrinkles smoothed, and the ends of his beard lifted in a familiar half-grin. Regulus forced himself to ask the question that had gnawed at him all night. He glanced at Dumbledore's left hand, which was empty now. The strange wand-like object had been put away. "What was that thing?" he asked. "It's called the Wand of Vengeance," Dumbledore replied simply. He answered without condescension, as if trusting Regulus by sharing the knowledge. His face grew a little solemn as he began to speak. In mid-16th century Italy, there was a dark wizard named Valentino Solito who became obsessed with manifesting pain into magic. He targeted the Black Death sweeping Europe and intercepted withered bone moths carrying the disease. "Withered bone moths?" Regulus said. He remembered fleeting references to such creatures in old records, but had not expected a connection to the object before him. "Yes," Dumbledore nodded. "A creature capable of spreading magical plagues, Valentino used dark arts to twist the pathogen those moths carried and developed what became known as the pestilence curse. It wasn't immediately fatal, but could be transmitted through withered bone moths. The afflicted first suffered skin ulcerations and agonizing joint pain. Their senses were consumed by pain, and their minds were gradually eroded into despair, until they died after weeks of torment." "Those faces," Regulus said, frowning, "were they formed from the condensed pain of the dead?" "Exactly so." A flicker of pity crossed Dumbledore's expression. "Valentino caused the deaths of 70,000 people in Bolzano and the surrounding villages. He condensed all that extreme pain and despair by dark means and forged it into the Wand of Vengeance." Regulus's fingertips twitched as he sorted through the implications. The wand's casing is bone, then, and its core should be Valentino's finger bone mixed with the powder from a withered bone moth's wings? Dumbledore raised an eyebrow at his quick deduction and smiled. "You observe carefully. The wand is indeed made of bone, and its core is as you suspect. At the time, Professor Marcus Valerius and 3 other professors cornered Valentino and seized the wand, but they found it could not be destroyed. The pain-bound magic had fused with the artifact. To forcibly destroy it would risk releasing that magic and causing a secondary catastrophe. So it was concealed here at Hogwarts, sealed with many ancient protective enchantments." Regulus felt the reason for Dumbledore's intervention clarified. Still, he wondered if the physical wand itself truly could not be destroyed. He didn't voice that doubt immediately. Instead, he asked the question that still burned. What was that white light just now? Those faces I struggled against so hard had no resistance to it. Dumbledore laughed softly. The crinkles at the corners of his eyes deepened with a touch of mischief. "It was a beam of light," he said, "but it carried some true light magic." Regulus nodded. He understood. An elemental counter, pure light against coiled pain. The logic had been sound, and Dumbledore had made it sound simple, but Regulus knew it wasn't. He kept replaying the scene in his head. When that white light swept through, every human face had dissolved like ice and snow. He had had to summon nearly all his strength just to keep from being swept away. The gap had been enormous, beyond what the eye could measure. Yet somehow it had been possible to follow. "McNair, Cuthbert, and Mr. Rosier are all in the hospital wing," Dumbledore said, changing the subject. He looked down at Regulus with a soft, steady gaze. "McNair is injured and will need treatment. He'll only remember that tonight's operation failed, nothing more. Cuthbert and Rosier arrived safely, though they're shaken. Madame Pomfrey says rest for the night will do them good." "Would you like to go see them?" he asked. Regulus shook his head. He was physically drained and mentally exhausted. "No, I want to go back to my dormitory and rest." He didn't ask how McNair would be handled. He didn't want to know. He didn't press Dumbledore about the curse Hermes had mentioned either. He preferred to hear it from Hermes himself. "Very well." Dumbledore did not insist. His eyes were full of understanding. "If you're free Saturday morning at 10, perhaps you could come to my office and we can talk." He blinked, and then the gentlest glint of a smile. "I have the best Ceylon black tea. It's rather good. I would be glad to." "Headmaster," Regulus said. Dumbledore offered his arm, indicating for Regulus to take it. Regulus hesitated a moment, then reached out. A strong spatial ripple passed through him, not the squeezing of apparition, nor the sliding of a space leap. It felt like being cradled in a warm membrane. The space around him warped and then shifted. The corridor blurred as if a canvas were being pulled, and in an instant he was standing in the Slytherin common room. It had been smooth and effortless, with none of the dizziness he associated with teleportation. Dumbledore did not appear with him. Regulus wondered if this was a high-level spatial charm the headmaster had mastered himself, or a special privilege granted by the castle, whether Dumbledore had performed this deliberately, or simply used whatever means Hogwarts provided to send him back. Maybe both. After all, the headmaster had probably noticed his study of space magic and might have been offering a subtle bit of guidance. The common room was quiet. Embers in the fireplace still gave off a faint heat. Regulus went to the sofa and sat. Looking back over the evening, he had to admit his plan had been reckless. Guided only by Hermes' hints and Darren's odd behavior, he'd led Avery and Alex into that passage. He had not fully understood the danger behind the stone door, and he had not expected the power of that artifact to be so far beyond his imagination. Worst of all, he had not foreseen Darren's impatience. Darren's eagerness for quick results and his reckless attempts to force things disrupted the plan entirely. Next time, he told himself, he'd gather far more information and be fully prepared. He couldn't take such risks again. He thought of Dumbledore's words, just a beam of light, carrying a bit of brightness. The image reminded him of the light source charms he'd once had a flash of inspiration about. Light could do more than illuminate or send signals. If a beam could carry light, perhaps it could carry other things too. Light is light, but Dumbledore had clearly been speaking of positive magical energy. If light could be a carrier, why not darkness as well? Black light is still light. Light pierces darkness, but darkness can swallow light back. That was a direction worth studying. Dumbledore's restraint that night nagged at him too, watching from the sidelines until the very last moment, then acting decisively. It fit the headmaster's style. Though the headmaster hadn't revealed much, what he did show was crucial. Regulus couldn't blame anyone else. The fault lay with his own lack of preparation. Still, the night's events had yielded positive results. The defensive arrangements, the Patronus, measures that suited Dumbledore perfectly. If the starry sky kite had arrived even a second later, Dumbledore might have witnessed fiendfire. Regulus had imagined his first real conversation with the headmaster would be in front of the mirror of Erised, but instead it would likely be after such an ordeal, over a pot of tea. That wasn't a bad alternative. Fatigue hit him like a tide. He stood, went back to his dormitory, shrugged off his robes, and lay down. Before long, his breathing was even and deep. Just as dawn broke, the dormitory door opened quietly. Avery and Alex had returned. Seeing Regulus asleep, they hesitated, then moved closer. The sound of their footsteps woke him. He opened his eyes. "Are you all right?" Avery asked, leaning toward the bed in a low voice. "I'm fine," Regulus said, sitting up. "Just tired." He looked at Alex and spoke softly. "You don't need to thank me." He added to Avery, "Since I brought you along, it's my responsibility to keep you safe." He could see the gratitude in Alex's eyes. Alex had never been the sort to take the initiative in things, unlike Avery, who had been spirited and eager. But Alex's thanks were genuine and unforced. "The headmaster has handled it. There shouldn't be any more danger," Regulus said calmly. "McNair's in the hospital wing receiving care. This matter ends here." "Don't tell anyone else," he added. He said it, and he believed it, but he also knew the truth. The matter wasn't entirely finished. The rest of what had happened now belonged to Dumbledore. If someone was causing trouble at Hogwarts and the headmaster didn't act, that would be unthinkable unless Dumbledore had other plans. Avery and Alex exchanged a look and nodded without pressing further. After what they'd gone through, they trusted Regulus completely. If he said it was over, they believed it. Even so, the crisis had changed them in small ways. Avery had lost some of his impulsiveness and gained steadiness. Alex had shed some of his fear and grown more resolute. Both looked at Regulus with not just trust, but something like belonging. "Let's go. Breakfast," Regulus said, standing and heading for the Great Hall. Avery and Alex followed, their steps lighter than the night before. He wasn't fully recovered, his spirit was still weary, but his magical energy had been replenished enough to get through the day. Classes went on as usual. After charms in the afternoon, Regulus made a beeline for the library. Last night's events had sparked a keen interest in wands. He had never particularly cared about them before. He'd always been adept at wandless casting. When Ollivander had sold him his current wand, he'd offered the usual spiel. Blackthorn wood, an unusual core, 12¼ inches, fairly supple. Symbolizes power, explosiveness, and courage, strong at spellcasting, suited to spellcasters who have abundant magical energy and dare to take risks. Compatible with both the dark arts and more benevolent magic, its bond with its owner deepens over time. Ollivander had predicted great deeds. At the time, Regulus had agreed. A wand was a tool. If it worked well, that was enough. But the artifact in the passage had upended that notion. Wands were not just instruments for directing magic. They could be vessels, carriers for curses, and the crystallization of particular crafts. He needed to learn more. Deep in the library, on the shelves in the charms section, he found several rows of books on wands. He scanned the titles: Exploration of Wand Origins, Principles of Resonance Between Wood and Core, Biographies of Famous Wand Makers. He pulled out a medium-thick volume with a dark brown leather cover, Unconventional Wands and Their Dangers. He took it to a window seat and opened the table of contents. Chapter 1 defined unconventional: any method of production that deviated from the Ollivander system. Chapter 2 outlined the risks. Chapter 3 began enumerating them by category. He flipped to Chapter 3, Emotion-Infused Wands. The book explained, such wands are not based on the natural resonance between wood and core, but instead have intense emotions forcibly infused into the wand's body, making it a source of continuous emotional influence. The production process typically involves the dark arts, requiring the extraction of emotions under specific conditions. The sealing process often accompanies the sacrifice of life. Several examples followed. Chapter 104, A Wounded Heaven and Earth. The Morning Wand, infused with the final wails of people dying on a battlefield, its bearer will constantly hear screams until they finally break. The Covenant Wand, infused with the remorse of betrayers when exposed, it amplifies suspicion and can ignite discord within a group. The Sacred Remains Wand, infused with the ecstasy of martyrs at execution, its owner will feel an overpowering urge towards self-sacrifice, even actively courting death. There was no entry for the other artifact Dumbledore had mentioned. Regulus decided that meant the example wasn't well known enough, or perhaps it wasn't in the same volume. He kept reading, pausing now and then to think. The common thread among these peculiar wands was their divergence from the ordinary. They were no longer mere tools to help a wizard cast more effectively. They were creations with their own unique effects, and those effects often came with a price. He turned to a chapter on the mutual influence between a wand and its owner. The author wrote, "The wand chooses the wizard, but the wizard also shapes the wand. Long-term use of the same wand leaves imprints of the wielder's magical character, casting habits, and even personality on the wood. In extreme cases, the wand gradually adapts to its owner, undergoing subtle changes." Regulus thought of his own wand, blackthorn wood, dragon heartstring core, 12¼ inches. After more than half a year of use, had it changed? He usually emphasized control and precision in his casting, keeping his magical energy stable and refined. Would those habits leave traces on the wand? It was possible. Outside the window, the sky was darkening. He closed the book. It was time for dinner. Afterward, he didn't go to the library, the restricted section, or the room of requirement. He needed rest. He lay down, but his mind kept working. He closed his eyes and ran an inventory: shield charm, confringo, expelliarmus, levitation charm, reparo, incendio, blasting curse, cutting curse, actio, 100 basic spells. He'd mastered high-level arts like apparition and the patronus charm. His transfiguration permitted elemental restructuring. His space magic had reached the brink of warping, and his star orbit meditation had lit 4½ stars. He could guide plant vitality with natural magic, had built a mental maze with occlumency, and in the dark arts he had learned the 3 unforgivable curses and studied their variants. He knew the incantation, gestures, and technique of fiendfire. He hadn't used it, but he could. The list replayed, but beneath it all, the scene by the astronomy tower would not fade. The gray mist, the faces, endless, infinite. At the time, he'd been able only to hold the shield charm and stand there. With his wand in hand and his spells flashing through his head, he hadn't been able to find a single one that would work. Impedimenta, Incendio, Confringo, Reducto, or Accio Dumbledore? Fiendfire might have burned them, but once unleashed, it was another risk entirely. The real problem was the number of faces. Every face that struck the shield charm drained a portion of his magical energy. The mental barrier took a share of the strain. 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000. Every face screamed, radiating despair and pain. Those negative emotions ate away at the barrier itself. His magic was a dam, and the gray mist a rising flood. No dam, however sturdy, holds forever. He could make the faces dissipate. Each time one hit the shield, it faded. But another immediately formed in the mist, as if nothing had happened. The source lay behind the stone door, within that wand. Without cutting off the source, every attack was useless. He had overlooked something fundamental: elemental counters. Darkness, despair, pain. Conventional magic had limited effect on anything made of pure negative energy. A shield charm blocks physical impacts and spells, but it fared poorly against emotional erosion. Confringo could shatter stone, but it could not disperse a mass of condensed resentment. It was like trying to extinguish the high-temperature air currents inside a raging fire with a bucket of water. He remembered Dumbledore's mention of that particular wand. 70,000 people. Northern Italy, Bolzano, and the surrounding villages, stricken by the Black Death, then overlaid with a twisted pestilence curse from the dark arts. Each infected person died after weeks of torture. Their terminal agony was extracted, compressed, condensed, and sealed by a dark mage named Valentino Solito. 70,000 portions of despair twisted into one object, crafted from black walnut mixed with finger bones. That artifact was powerful. The negative magical energy of 70,000 people could sustain a cursed domain for centuries, essentially 70,000 low-grade dementors. But it wasn't invincible. The book even recalled Dumbledore picking it up as if it were a fallen leaf. He must have had something up his sleeve, some way of isolating the wand's link to the outside world. Perhaps his own magic formed the most powerful vessel, wrapping the artifact inside it. A map appeared in Regulus's mind, a Muggle nation of small islands on a tectonic compression zone prone to volcanoes and earthquakes. The despair of 70,000 people could make such an object. What, then, of 100 million? The thought was too abstract and too dangerous, and he pushed it away. To confront something so extreme, one must either meet it with an equal extreme attribute or override it with a higher-level concept. The only extreme attribute Regulus had mastered was the Patronus charm. He could feel that purity, the thirst for freedom, the longing for the open world, the instinct to break barriers. It was the condensation of positive emotion, a natural counter to negative magic. That was why the faces shrank from it and dissolved under its silvery light. The nature of the Patronus was profound. The original text said many wizards never produce a corporeal Patronus in their lifetime. Conjuring mist alone was already excellent. It required more than happy memories. It required a firm, bright spiritual core capable of banishing darkness. His starry sky kite could disperse the mist, but dispersal was not elimination. The faces regenerated because the source remained. His Patronus was like a lamp making the darkness retreat. To purify the whole expanse like Dumbledore would require not a lamp but a sun. The gap between them was obvious. Another option was fiendfire. It was indiscriminate. Wood, stone, magic, even fragments of soul, all could be consumed. When attribute opposition failed, one could try existence versus non-existence. Fiendfire was pure annihilation, a primitive urge to return everything to nothing. It transcended attribute warfare because it didn't belong to any attribute. It was simply the end. For that reason, it was dangerous. What could burn an enemy could burn its wielder. That danger is why the dark arts classified it so. Regulus, however, did not think of it as evil. It was simply a tool with a fundamental function. He opened his eyes and stared at the canopy above his bed. Dumbledore had chosen to use light and had deliberately let Regulus see it. That light was gentle and natural. Wherever it passed, the gray mist vanished. Of course, the headmaster knew other methods, fiendfire, other dark arts, and the Patronus went without saying. But he had chosen the most restrained, the most correct one. Light, after all. A corner of Regulus's mouth twitched, but he kept his expression controlled. He understood the message. There are countless paths in magic, and this is the one I choose because I believe it's worth walking. Dumbledore wasn't showing off power, he was showing a choice. His methods needed work. Magic of extreme attributes needed deeper research, and the philosophy behind overriding concepts like fiendfire required fuller understanding. But he couldn't lose his way. Star orbit meditation was the foundation. Natural magic and space magic were the directions. Everything else would follow in time. He had no need to rush. He was only in his first year, and there was time. The next morning, Regulus went to the hospital wing with Avery and Alex. Hermes was awake. Madame Pomfrey said the curse had receded, but he was still very weak. When they entered the ward, Hermes sat propped against pillows. His face was ashen, his eyes sunken. He looked hollowed out, robes hanging off him. Regulus stopped at the bedside. Hermes lifted his eyelids and looked at him. There was no anger, only exhaustion. "Get well," Regulus said, his tone flat, neither over-friendly nor distant, just a simple wish. Avery stood a little behind him, straighter than usual. When he looked at Hermes, his chin tipped up in a quiet, unmistakable taunt. "I handled the thing that almost killed you." He had been told not to say much, but he could not help himself. "You're not up to much, are you?" Avery said. His voice wasn't loud, but the meaning was clear. Hermes turned his head toward him, but offered no reply. Chapter 105. Professor, I was wrong. Alex stood beside Avery and looked at Hermes without looking away this time. He did not like that gloomy roommate, but seeing him lying in the hospital bed had shifted something in Alex. It wasn't exactly bravery, but like Avery, he felt a new confidence born of experience. His lips moved. He wasn't as showy as Avery. He simply said, "Get well soon." The visit didn't last long. Madame Pomfrey hadn't set a time limit, but after less than 5 minutes, the three of them were ready to leave. As Regulus turned, Hermes rasped suddenly, his voice like sandpaper. "Thank you." Regulus didn't look back. He just gave a small wave. At the hospital wing entrance, they ran into Abros Mulciber. He still wore the dark patterned black robe and stood in the corridor's shadow like a statue. Regulus paused. "You two go on," he said to Avery and Alex. Avery glanced at Abros, then at Regulus, and nodded. He and Alex bowed slightly to Abros by way of greeting and left quickly. The corridor fell quiet. Abros didn't speak. He turned down toward the stairs, and Regulus followed. They stopped in a blind spot where no portraits hung and no students passed. "Dumbledore came by yesterday morning," Abros said in a low, flat voice. "He lifted the curse on Hermes." Regulus waited. "He didn't say anything else," Abros continued. Regulus understood the implication. Dumbledore had come and removed the curse, but he hadn't punished the Mulciber family, nor mentioned whatever had happened beneath the astronomy tower. It felt like an unspoken bargain, or at least a mutual understanding. Abraz's eyes, a stormy gray-brown, settled on Regulus. "From now on, I'll need you to keep an eye on Hermes." Regulus's chest tightened. Abros did not mean simply that Hermes should spend time with him. Was the House of Mulciber making a statement? Were they signaling that they accepted Dumbledore's oversight and accepted the person the headmaster favored? This differed from old Borgen's deal. The Burkes had sought the backing of the Blacks in the Wizengamot. The Mulcibers seemed to be looking for a safe position under Dumbledore's watch. Dumbledore had approached Abros. The content of their talk was unknown, but the result was clear. The Mulcibers wanted Hermes close to Regulus. Regulus suspected he wasn't far off. "All right," he said, keeping his voice steady. Ebros gave a short nod and walked away. Morning potions with Professor Slughorn was shared with Gryffindor today. Slughorn was teaching the boil cure, and the ingredient table was laid out with precise components and several jars of oddly colored pus. Regulus was paired with Alex. Alex's hands were nimble, if a little hesitant with one of the measurements. Regulus handled the brewing. The potion changed from dark green to a brownish yellow, then into a uniform dark brown toffee color. There were no bubbles, the viscosity was right, and the smell was pungent but stable with a hint of sulfur. Slughorn drifted over, scooped a spoonful, held it to the light, and smiled. The potion formed an even film in the silver spoon, translucent and pure. "Perfect," Slughorn beamed. "Color, viscosity, scent, all within standards, even exceeding them. 10 points to Slytherin." A few stifled gasps rippled through the classroom. Mary McDonald from Gryffindor gave Regulus a thumbs up. Regulus nodded once in reply. Alfred Prewett curled his lip and bent back to his own bubbling cauldron. After the bell rang, the students packed their things. Regulus did not move. Avery and Alex stayed with him. When the classroom had emptied, except for the three of them, Regulus rose and walked to the podium. Slughorn was tidying his materials. His eyebrows lifted when he saw them. "Professor," Regulus began, "about Hermes Mulciber, we need to apologize." Slughorn walked around his desk and folded his hands over his stomach. "We knew he was up in the astronomy tower," Regulus continued, "but we didn't report it in time. We wanted to find out the truth ourselves." Avery stepped forward a half pace. "We were wrong, Professor," he said. Alex mumbled, "Sorry," in a small voice. Slughorn's smile dimmed only slightly. There was no scolding in his eyes. He was quiet for a moment before he spoke. "Young students are curious and want to prove they can solve things themselves. That is natural. I did my share of the same when I was young, though, of course, not as dangerous as this." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "But I must tell you, the professors at Hogwarts are not only here to teach you how to stir a cauldron or wave a wand. We are also responsible for making sure you leave school alive. Some secrets are secrets because they are truly deadly." His gaze swept over the three of them. "Next time you come across something like this, come to me first, or find another professor. That is not weakness, it is wisdom. Understand?" "Understood," Regulus said. "Very good." Slughorn smiled and took a crystal bottle from a drawer, its contents a golden liquid. "1 drop each before bed," he said, "to help steady your spirits and clear away unpleasant influences." They took the drops, thanked him, and left. Once out of the dungeons, Avery exhaled. "I thought we were going to lose points," he said. "We wouldn't," Regulus replied. "The professor wanted the right attitude." "What attitude?" Alex asked. "Admit your mistakes, accept guidance, and don't repeat them," Regulus answered calmly. He told them that, though privately he thought, recognize the mistake and change, then keep changing until you truly have. Herbology in the afternoon took place in Greenhouse 3. They were learning how to fertilize puffapods. Professor Sprout wore thick dragon hide gloves as she demonstrated how to spread a special fertilizer evenly at the pod's base without provoking it to secrete corrosive slime. Regulus was assigned a particularly healthy pod. He crouched, his left hand steadying the shell, while his right used a small trowel to work the soil at the roots. He extended his magical perception at the same time. He felt the lively, almost impish vitality within the pod and the coarse but pure essence in the fertilizer. When the two met, the pod shivered and its shell took on an oily, healthy green sheen. After class, the others filed out, but Regulus lingered. Professor Sprout was watering a pot of screech snap and gave him a nod. "Is there something, Mr. Black?" she asked. "Professor," Regulus said as he joined her, "I have a question about the attributes of magical plants." Sprout set the watering can down and wiped her hands on her apron, her expression kind. "Go on." "If magical energy can have opposing qualities like light and dark," he said, "can plants have similar attributes? Is there a plant that naturally restrains dark magic or brings hope?" Sprout looked at him, curiosity and approval in her eyes. She led him deeper into the greenhouse until they stood before a row of shelves. On them were terracotta pots holding unassuming silver grass with long, serrated leaves. "Moonlight orchids," she said. "They only bloom on full moon nights. Their petals glow faintly, and the color changes with the month. They repel some low-level dark creatures, certain things associated with inferi." She touched a leaf lightly. "More importantly, their pollen can be refined into a serenity draught. It helps stabilize the mind and resist minor erosion of spirit. St. Mungo's often uses it to treat psychological trauma after dark arts injuries." Regulus studied the plant closely. Under the greenhouse lights, the fine fuzz on the leaves shimmered like mother of pearl. "But it can't counter darkness at the level of a dementor, can it?" he asked quietly. Professor Sprout shook her head. "No, the moonlight orchid supports and mitigates. To truly counter darkness of that magnitude, you would need something far more extreme." "Like what, Professor?" Regulus asked. Professor Sprout was quiet for a moment, then walked over to a locked glass cabinet at the very back of the greenhouse. She produced a key, opened the door, and inside there was only one plant. It was a small shrub, no more than 30 centimeters tall, its branches black as charcoal, its leaves pure white with golden filaments running through the veins. "Sunlight ebony shrub," she said softly. "Legend says it only grows in ancient church graveyards or where saints were martyred. It needs an exceptionally pure light to survive." "That purity doesn't mean ordinary sunlight," she added, almost to herself. "It means the embodiment of faith." She stroked the leaves as if fondling a child. "Hogwarts has only this one. A Ravenclaw headmaster left it here 300 years ago." Regulus felt something stir inside him. "A holy relic?" He kept his voice steady. "Professor, what does it do?" "Purification." Sprout's face grew serious. "It converts dark magic into harmless, neutral magic. The process is slow, and it requires the caster to have a strong inclination toward the light." Regulus instinctively wanted to widen his magical perception, call up natural magic, and link to the shrub's aura, but Professor Sprout's eyes locked on his. He stopped, feigning innocence. She held his gaze a moment longer, then shut the cabinet and locked it again. "Just remember that," she said. "At your stage, you need to lay a solid foundation. Learn the life rhythms of plants and how to resonate with natural magic. Attribute opposition is an advanced topic. There will be plenty of time for that later." Regulus nodded. "I understand. Thank you, Professor." Natural magic. The direction was right. He left the greenhouse as dusk was falling. The smell of dinner drifted through the castle corridors, and the distant sound of students laughing followed him. He slowed his pace, thinking about the sunlight ebony shrub, one thing gentle, the other extreme. The attribute spectrum of the plant world was clearer than he had expected. He thought of Dumbledore's beam of light, gentle but invincible. Perhaps gentleness and extremity were not true opposites. Real strength might be achieving the most extreme effects in the gentlest way. He was not there yet. He needed time, study, practice, and for the star orbit meditation to ignite more stars. After the greenhouse door closed behind him, Professor Sprout stayed where she was, her eyes lingering on the glass that still swung slightly. Evening light slanted through, throwing long shadows across the stone floor. The air smelled of soil and humus, of dragon dung, and the mingled scents of hundreds of magical plants. She remembered the same hour the day before, when she had been repotting the few venomous tentacula she'd brought from Albania. That plant had strict requirements for light and soil conditions, and always needed careful tending after transplanting. Footsteps came behind her, familiar footsteps. She turned. Dumbledore stood in the central aisle, blue eyes peering over his half-moon spectacles. He wore a deep purple robe stitched with stars, and his beard was tied with a ribbon. "Pomona," he said in his usual unhurried tone, There is something I would like to speak with you about. They moved to the seating area in the corner, 2 rattan chairs and a small round table. Dumbledore drew a tin can from his sleeve, tapped it, and steam rose from the opening, his usual honey tea. He poured 2 cups and pushed one toward her. "It concerns Regulus Black," he said. Professor Sprout raised an eyebrow. "That boy. He is very special," Dumbledore finished gently. Sprout agreed. From the first herbology lesson, Regulus had been different from the other first years. Most children flinched away from a booba-tuber, or found it disgusting, or were so reckless they nearly got pus in the face. Regulus moved with agility and care. His actions were precise. He asked questions, observed, and perceived things other young students never noticed. Sensitivity to magic wasn't rare, but the way he approached magical plants was. He did not have the childish, earthy love for plants that Sprout herself had once known. He seemed more interested in the magic the plants represented, in how to use them, and not in life itself. That made her grateful for his talent and quietly worried about his motives. Time after time in class, he asked deeper and deeper questions. Whether plants had emotions, why mandrakes were lethal, why their cries did not affect their own kind. His inquiries progressed from plant characteristics to the nature of magic, and then to the interaction between plants, their environment, and magical forces. She remembered one lesson, loosening soil and repotting mandrake seedlings, and Regulus guiding a wisp of natural magic to form a temporary but stable connection with them. She knew natural magic well. She might even be said to understand it deeply. She hadn't corrected him in front of everyone, but she had kept him after class and explained the tendencies of plant magic, the nerve paralysis of venomous tentacula, devil's snares life-draining, the physical crushing of the humping willow. He had seemed to understand, and perhaps to have taken the ideas further. He leapt ahead in understanding, and she always felt obliged to warn him. Be careful. Don't move too fast. Protect yourself. Recalling this, Dumbledore sipped his tea and set the cup down with a small clink. Tomorrow in herbology, Dumbledore said, Mr. Black may ask about more advanced topics. For example? Sprout asked. Dumbledore leaned forward, fingers steepled. Whether there exists a plant whose attribute opposition mirrors that of Patronus and Dementor, the opposing principles of light and dark, negative and positive, their existence and the principles behind such opposition. Sprout was silent for a few seconds. Those are S-level topics. They go beyond standard Hogwarts teaching. I know, Dumbledore said gently, but if Mr. Black asks, you can tell him everything you know. Including the sunlight ebony shrub? She looked at him, serious behind her spectacles. Yes, Dumbledore replied. Professor Sprout's teacup hit the table with a heavier sound. Albus, she said, shaking her head. You know how dangerous that is. Its purity verges on a fanatical light inclination. It's far too much for a first year to be exposed to. Mr. Black is not an ordinary first year, Dumbledore said calmly. His power and the maturity of his mind already exceed those of his peers. He is still a child, Sprout insisted. 11 years old. Even if he is cleverer and stronger than others, he is only 11. Dumbledore corrected her softly. He is 12. She ignored the correction and met his gaze. We should guide him, not let him run ahead unmoored. If he is already walking on a path and we cover his eyes because he is too young, what will happen? Dumbledore asked. He will explore on his own, possibly take dangerous detours we might have helped him avoid. I don't mean abandon him. I mean give him the help he needs, answer his questions truthfully when he asks, and let him decide his path. Professor Sprout fell silent and looked into the depths of the greenhouse at plants unfurling under magical light. She remembered the year she first became a professor. A promising Hufflepuff who loved herbology, wanted to skip the basics and study advanced material. She had stopped him several times, but he later experimented in private, was badly injured, and had to pause his studies for a year. Overprotection is a shackle. Laissez-faire is dangerous. No one could draw the perfect line. I do know more than one type of dark attribute plant, she said quietly, as if conceding. She began to give examples. Dumbledore smiled, that gentle smile she had known over 20 years of working together. She could always understand him, and, when it came to Regulus, she would help. Chapter 17 Wand Materials Science. Weeping Willow, Its branches ooze corrosive sap the moment they touch a living thing. The sap is full of unbearable despair. It's hard to say which is stronger, it or a dementor. Bloodthorn vine grows on battlefields or sites of massacres, feeding on the residue of negative emotions left in the land. Its flowers release hallucinogenic pollen that forces people to relive the terror of their own deaths. If you truly believe you are dead, you will be. And then there's the screaming fungus. That mushroom only grows where many creatures have died unnaturally. When it matures, it emits a sound like a dying whale, and anyone who hears it is immediately brought to the brink of death. Dumbledore nodded as she listed them. But I won't tell him. If he asks, I will only say sunlight ebony shrub. Professor Sprout shifted the topic, because at least in that direction it sounds upward. Dumbledore's smile faltered for a moment. He lifted his teacup, sipped lightly, and glanced away. When he looked back, he only saw the resolve in Pomona Sprout's eyes. He sighed softly, rose from his seat so that the hem of his robe brushed the edge of the rattan chair, and something like helplessness flashed across his blue eyes. He knew the stubbornness of the colleague he had worked alongside for 20 years. I understand, Pomona. We both care for the students, each in our own way. I only hope that the next time Mr. Black comes to ask you, you can trust him a little more, she replied. When Dumbledore left, Professor Sprout sat in the rattan chair for a long time. She was, of course, not just a herbology professor tucked away in a greenhouse. She was the head of Hufflepuff. She convened faculty meetings, graded essays, and handled the small but important affairs of the house. Which student's family had fallen on hard times, which child was being ostracized, who was secretly dabbling in dangerous magic. Hufflepuff pupils were mostly gentle and slow, but when a quiet child swung to an extreme, the consequences could be severe. She knew the state of the world outside Hogwarts, the choosing of sides by pureblood families, the widening sway of Lord Voldemort, the increasingly polarized opinions printed daily in the Prophet. She knew what the name Black represented. Yet she never chose to intervene directly. She tended her plants, taught her classes, handed a cup of hot tea to a pupil who needed it, or listened to a child complain for 10 minutes. Years later, some would write back, "Professor, what you said then helped me a lot." That was enough. She understood Albus's thinking and accepted much of it, but not all of it. She had her own way. After dinner, Regulus went to the library. Avery and Alex fell in behind him. Neither spoke, but their strides were oddly in sync. Regulus's brows twitched. Last term, the two had forced themselves to walk to the library with him a few times, but after that, they never volunteered again. He knew Avery was following now because, after the astronomy tower incident, the idea of "we are together" had suddenly become concrete. After sharing something like that, going back to doing their own separate things felt wrong. Going to the library wasn't purely about study. It was a way of confirming that this small group still functioned, that they still belonged to it. Avery might not be able to name the feeling, but his actions already had. Alex was much the same. Perhaps he clung to the memory of being protected, and that translated into a clumsy sense of belonging. Regulus didn't stop them. Wanting to study was always good, whatever the motive. As long as they sat at a desk and opened a book, time would not be wasted. He could tolerate arrogant people, hypocrites, cowards, selfish or insidious types, the powerful and the weak, but there could be no illiterates. That was the bottom line. The three took a long table by the window. Regulus pulled out the Introduction to Wand Lore he hadn't finished the night before. Avery grabbed a copy of A History of Medieval Wizard Duels. Alex hesitated before choosing A Guide to Common Magical Creature Husbandry. The first 20 minutes were quiet, filled only with the turning of pages and the rustle of quills on parchment. Regulus had expected Avery to be the first to lose patience, but it was Alex who fidgeted. He shifted, eyes straying from his book toward the library entrance, then back again. The third time his gaze wandered, he bumped his elbow lightly against Avery. Avery, staring at an illustration in his book, two wizards blasting each other with spells long since outlawed, a flashy but useless display, frowned at the interruption and turned his head to glare at Alex, eyes saying, "You had better have something serious." Alex didn't speak. He gestured toward the entrance with his eyes. Avery followed his glance. Lily Evans stood at the borrowing desk, talking with Madame Pince. Her red hair was visible as she held a few thick books in her arms. The cuffs of her robe were speckled with ink. Avery's lip curved reflexively in disdain, a near instinct for someone from a pure-blood family toward a muggle-born. But out of the corner of his eye, he saw Regulus. For some reason, he suppressed the curl of his lip and nudged Regulus with his knee. Regulus looked up. Avery tilted his chin toward the door and murmured, very low, "Evans is here." Without waiting for Regulus to reply, Avery snapped his book shut and hauled Alex to his feet. Alex stumbled but scrambled to stuff his things into his bag. As they passed Lily, Avery offered only the slightest, almost imperceptible tilt of his head. Alex, half a step behind, managed a stiff smile. "Miss Evans," he said. Lily glanced up, saw them, and froze for a moment. By the time she could respond, the two boys had already moved away. She watched their backs and then looked to where Regulus sat deeper within the library. Realization dawned on her. Regulus must have sent them. She crossed the table and sat opposite him, her satchel thudding softly as she set it down. "Good evening," she said. Regulus looked up and returned the greeting. "Good evening." Lily drew from her bag the reference book she needed for her potions essay. For the next half hour, the two of them read in silence. In the library, the only interruptions were the occasional distant cough and the faint whisper of Madame Pince's duster as she rearranged the shelves. Regulus was reading the section on wand woods. Introduction to Wand Lore was an elementary text. It listed facts rather than analyzed them. It said that roughly 30 types of wandwood were commonly used in the British wizarding world, and even fewer core materials: phoenix feather, dragon heartstring, unicorn tail hair, plus a handful of nerve or hair cores from other magical creatures. Each material got a short typology. Holly symbolizes purity and protection and suits upright witches and wizards. Yew is tied to the boundary between life and death and suits those drawn to darker paths. Phoenix feathers contain powerful magic but are difficult to master. Dragon heartstrings favor forceful, aggressive spells. Unicorn hair is the most consistent but offers limited potential for growth. Regulus's finger paused on the section title, British Wand-Making Traditions. The problem stared at him from the page. It was all surface. The book told you what each material did, but not why. Why should a phoenix feather contain such raw magical power? Why does a dragon heartstring lend itself to launching aggressive spells? What laws govern the conduction of magic through a wand's wooden fibers? How does resonance form between different cores and a witch or wizard's own magic? There were no answers, or rather the answers were jealously guarded by a handful of wand-making families. Ollivander stood out among them. The narrow shop in Diagon Alley, boxes stacked to the ceiling, wood shavings, and shimmer of magic dust forever in the air. Mr. Ollivander had said many things when he fitted Regulus's wand. Blackthorn, dragon heartstring, 12¼ inches. Words that meant power and explosive force, suited to wizards with abundant magic who dared to take risks. Mr. Ollivander had told him he could do great things. Regulus did not doubt Ollivander's skill. The ability to choose the most fitting wand for a young witch or wizard from among thousands in mere minutes was a kind of magic itself. He only thought it was a pity. In the British world, wand-making was almost monopolized by the Ollivander family. Wand traditions from other places, thunderbird tail feathers from the Americas, bamboo-jointed wands from the East, carved totems from Africa, were seldom seen here. They existed, of course, but not in the mainstream. Diversity was vanishing, and witches and wizards had come to accept the mystical tale that a wand chose its owner, rather than question the principles behind that narrative. Wand lore had become an empirical craft, its core knowledge locked away in family archives. Outsiders learned only the surface. He closed the book and leaned back in his chair. Chapter 108, Regulus's Daddy Flavor. There was half an hour left until the library closed. As usual, Regulus and Lily spent this time talking about anything but their studies, a little relaxation, and an information exchange at once. Lily spoke first. She leaned forward, resting her upper body on the table, green eyes fixed on Regulus. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Do you know the girl in our dorm, Marcia Fleury?" Regulus searched his memory. Pure blood family. He'd seen her once at a banquet last year, sitting quietly beside her mother. "I know her." Lily's expression tightened with a faint look of adolescent worry. She's actually not a bad person. Her tone grew serious. Really, she's never used the word mudblood or pushed blood status, but she's always showing off. Showing off what? Regulus asked. Everything. Lily spread her hands, somewhere between helpless and amused. Today, she says her family keeps a diricol, and how beautiful its feathers are, how magical its call. Tomorrow, she says her mother taught her a small family spell that turns ink into rainbow colors. The day after that, she talks about a 16th century collection of poetry her grandfather gave her. How old the parchment is, how exquisite the illustrations are. Regulus's expression softened. He listened, then said, I don't hate her. Lily twirled a lock of red hair, her face scrunched. Those things do sound interesting. I just don't know how to respond. If I say that's amazing, it's too perfunctory. If I say, can I see it, she wouldn't bring it to school. And the way she talks, I know it isn't meant as showing off, more like sharing, but it also carries this is something only my family has vibe. Regulus thought for a few seconds. She might just want to be friends with you and is using the only way she knows. Lily tilted her head. What do you mean? Pureblood families, especially the girls, start social education very early. How to speak, how to present gifts, how to display family heritage while keeping a proper distance. Marcia's been trained to show advantages just enough to attract potential allies. Regulus spoke evenly. The problem is, her advantages might not be advantages to you. No matter how beautiful her diricol is, you haven't seen it. No matter how magical the family spell is, you can't learn it here. No matter how precious the old book is, you can't touch it. So what should I do? Lily asked. You don't have to do anything, Regulus said. Listen to her. Ask the occasional question to show you're listening. Lily was silent for a moment, then laughed. You sound like an adult sometimes. Regulus shrugged, not flippant, as if to say, take it or leave it. Lily rested her elbows on the table and blinked. Do you think people from pure-blood families, even if they want to make friends with Muggleborns, will only use their own way and never accommodate the other person? Regulus looked at her. Would you learn pure-blood social etiquette to be friends with Marcia? Memorize family trees, memorize coats of arms, learn to crook your pinky when drinking tea, speak in an affected voice? Lily was stumped. See, you wouldn't either, so why demand she cater to you? Because her family background is good? Because she should be more tolerant? I didn't mean that. Lily's voice softened. On reflection, she hadn't really demanded anything. It was Regulus laying it out. Feeling justified again, she glared at him indignantly. I know. Regulus's tone was gentle. Making friends is a two-way choice. If you get along, talk more. If you don't, keep a polite distance. Bloodline and family background are just backdrops. True friendship doesn't depend on them. You don't have to like how she shares, but you don't have to force anything either. Decide if she's worth your time. Lily stared at him a long moment, long enough for Regulus to think she was angry. Then she laughed. Sometimes I really doubt you're only 11. I'm 12, Regulus corrected calmly. That's even scarier, Lily muttered, then laughed again. They fell silent and returned to reading. When the closing bell rang, Madame Pince patrolled the aisles, urging students out. Regulus and Lily packed up and left the library together. At the fork between the way to the dungeons and the towers, Lily stopped. Thank you, she said. You're welcome. Regulus nodded and turned toward the Slytherin common room. After a few steps, Lily called after him. Regulus. He turned back. You too. She stood in the shadow at the corner of the stairwell, her green eyes catching the dim light. If one day you want to show off something, like you've learned some powerful family spell, you can just say it. I won't think you're bragging. Regulus's mouth twitched. I will. He continued on, the hem of his black robe sweeping the stone steps, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. When Lily pushed open the dormitory door, Marcia Fleury sat on her bed holding a dark green book. She looked up as Lily entered, a look of mixture, anticipation, hesitation. Good evening, Marcia, Lily said, hanging her bag on the bedpost. Good evening, Lily. Marcia closed the book and stroked its cover. Lily turned to face her casually. By the way, what does the diricol you mentioned look like? I've only seen textbook illustrations. Marcia's eyes lit up. She leaned forward, the book in her lap, describing with small gestures. It's about this big, a little smaller than an ordinary crow. Its feathers are dark blue but shimmer silver in moonlight. Her voice went low and mysterious. The most special thing is its call. People say the Duracall's cry is prophetic, that whoever hears it will soon die. That's not really true. It cries in reaction to impending sorrow, disaster, or death. It only cries mournfully when something nearby is about to die or suffer a great misfortune. Over time, people misinterpreted its cry as the cause of death. Lily sat down on the bed and listened. Marcia spoke quickly now, excited. Mine's called Silver Star. It was a birthday gift from my grandfather when I was 5. It's very intelligent. It remembers everyone's footsteps in the house. When my father comes home, before he even opens the door, Silver Star flies to the foyer perch to wait. But it's picky. It only eats a certain type of magical nut from France, and it needs fresh, rootless grass juice 3 times a week. She spoke about Silver Star flying to her shoulder and nuzzling her cheek when she was sad, about holding it by the fireplace when she was sick last winter. Listening, Lily realized Regulus had been right. Marcia wasn't showing off so much as sharing in the only way she knew how, offering the precious, unique, maybe slightly childish, but genuine parts of her life. This little pureblood girl was trying, clumsily and cautiously, to open a crack into her world and reach out. The thought made Lily's chest warm. Friendship should be simpler than this, she felt. Marcia stopped abruptly, cheeks pink. Did I talk too much? No. Lily shook her head, smiling. It's interesting. I've never kept a magical pet. My sister Petunia always wanted a cat, but Mum's allergic. Marcia relaxed. She hesitated, then patted the mattress beside her. Do you want to sit here? I brought candies from home. They're from Honeydukes. You probably haven't tried them. Lily sat down. Marcia opened a lacquer box and took out a few neatly wrapped sweets. They were delicious. A crisp shell with flowing honey inside and a hint of mint. The two sat shoulder to shoulder, eating quietly. Marcia leaned close and whispered, "Thank you, Lily." "For what?" Lily asked. "For listening to me." Marcia looked down at her candy wrapper. Others aren't very interested. She'd tried to make friends the way her family taught her and found it didn't work with Lily. Unsure what else to do, she'd kept repeating the methods she knew. "You can tell me more in the future," Lily said sincerely. "About Silver Star, or anything else. I like listening." Marcia looked at her, eyes shining in the dormitory light, and nodded eagerly. Lily thought of Regulus again. He always saw things differently, and yet he was right. She laughed out loud. Marcia looked at her, puzzled. "What's so funny?" "Nothing," Lily said, smiling. "Just thinking of a friend. Sometimes he talks, exactly like my dad." Chapter 109, Teleportation Magic. When Regulus Black returned to the Slytherin dormitory, Avery and Alex Rosier were playing wizard's chess at a small table by the window. The match had clearly reached a stalemate. Both boys stared at the pieces with furrowed brows. Avery's queen was shouting at him, while Alex's king fulminated at his owner. The door opened, and the two looked up at Regulus in unison before lowering their heads back to the board in perfect synchronization. They looked composed enough, but the guilt radiating off them was hard to miss. Regulus ignored it. He had only come back to wait for Madame Pince to finish closing the library so he could go to the restricted section. Shortly after he sat down, the king on the board let out a string of coarse curses, hardly language suitable for young readers. Then Avery spoke, sounding hesitant. "About that matter." Regulus looked up. "The incident at the astronomy tower. Can I tell my family about it?" Avery meant the same thing Regulus did. He tilted his chin slightly to encourage Avery to continue. "I promised you I wouldn't tell anyone," Avery said, absently stroking the horse head of a knight. "But I've been thinking. That incident involves both the McNair and the Mulciber families. Hermes was injured so badly, and that place was dangerous. There must be things we don't know. I feel like my family should know." Avery's expression was serious. His tone was consultative. After the initial shock had worn off, he realized he might have been dragged into some power play between pure-blood families. His instinct was to seek help from his family, or at least to report the situation. But he remembered his promise to Regulus, so he asked. Regulus considered. Avery was right. The House of Cuthbert needed to know. Not only the Cuthberts, Alex's Rosier family should be informed as well. While Alex's branch might choose not to interfere directly, They had a right to be told. Regulus also thought further ahead. If Lord Voldemort's influence truly lay behind the astronomy tower incident, the fact that Avery had been involved and escaped might affect the Cuthberts' future stance. "Tell them when you go home for Easter," Regulus said, steady. "Don't write letters. Tell them in person." Avery nodded. Alex followed suit. Regulus added, "There are things you don't know. For example, Abros Mulciber has long known that Darren McNair was the one who caused Hermes' injury. He knew, but he didn't expose him. He helped cover it up." Avery's eyes widened. "Why?" Alex asked in a low voice. "I can't tell you the specifics," Regulus replied. "If Mr. Cuthbert and Mr. Rosier want to know, they can inquire through the House of Black." Avery and Alex didn't know the details of what happened, what Abros's change of attitude signified, or what lay behind that stone door. But once they were home and told their parents, Mr. Cuthbert and Mr. Rosier would realize there was a deeper agenda. The key information was with Regulus. If they wanted answers, they would have to go through him or the House of Black. The two boys exchanged a glance, and neither pushed further. The astronomy tower had forged a trust in Regulus. If he had asked them to keep silent, there was a reason. The silence lasted a few seconds. Avery's Adam's apple bobbed, and he almost spoke. "Regulus, that Evans girl." Regulus lifted his face, expressionless, eyes fixed on Avery. The unfinished remark died in Avery's throat. He opened his mouth, closed it, and finally turned away, pretending to study a minor piece on the board. Alex was trying not to laugh. His shoulders trembled. Regulus ignored them, stood, tucked his wand into the inner pocket of his robes, and pushed open the dormitory door. As it closed behind him, he heard a mix of awkward and curious laughter from inside. The corridors of Hogwarts late at night were empty and silent. Portraits slept, suits of armor stood motionless, and only the torches burned, casting flickering shadows. Regulus moved along the wall under enhanced disillusionment charm. The astronomy tower incident had revealed two problems. Facing a large-scale sustained assault, he lacked efficient area of effect offensive measures. And in enclosed environments where apparition was impossible, his mobility was a serious shortcoming. He did not want the cost of losing control over something like fiendfire, but he knew the prerequisites for such curses and could use them if necessary. He had other goals, too. For mobility, the time had come to find an alternative. Space leap techniques were still immature. His Patronus could not yet carry him, and apparition would be blocked by anti-apparition charms. He needed a method of rapid movement that did not rely on raw teleportation. Physically, star orbit meditation had refined him. His endurance and strength far exceeded that of most students and even surpassed many adult wizards. If anyone thought they could neutralize him simply by restricting his spellcasting, he would teach them otherwise. But physical speed had limits. To seize and maintain initiative in battle, he needed better movement magic. Deep in the restricted section, dust lay thick on the shelves. Regulus ran his fingers over the spines and extended his magical perception to touch the magic-solidified imprints of thought left in the pages. At first, this way of reading had been a significant mental burden. Now he could do it for an hour straight without great fatigue. He found several potentially relevant titles. The Wizard's Mobile Tactics, From Basic to Advanced, written by an 18th century aura commander and detailing use of terrain and spell combinations to maintain mobility. A study of non-spatial displacement magic, a dry but systematic theoretical work. And Rhythm Control in Dueling, which focused on creating displacement opportunities in transitions between offense and defense. Regulus started with the first book and noted several useful spells. The Quickening Charm. After casting, it greatly increases movement speed, similar to accelerated running. The body's surface emits a faint white light, and motion can leave afterimages. It's a pure speed boost that doesn't alter the mode of movement. It's still running, so anti-apparition charms can't block it. Momentum. Arresto, originally a slowing charm, but cast in reverse, it allows inertia-free sprinting. It provides rapid acceleration and flexible turning, preventing loss of control from excessive speed. Tactical and ideal for short-distance breakouts, it pairs well with impedimenta, and anti-apparition charms are ineffective against it. Side-along apparition, a simplified apparition. It doesn't require full teleportation, only a short lateral shift. It's flexible and useful for dodging with low magical cost, but can't be used continuously. It is suitable for quick position adjustments. Anti-apparition charms can suppress it, but with relatively weak effect. The flying charm, based on levitation. High-level use allows short-distance flight or gliding. By controlling magical output, one can move slowly or cross obstacles. It's slow and non-aggressive, suitable for low-altitude movement, crossing ditches or walls without a broom. It requires careful magical control. Regulus noted the principles and gestures and closed the book. Each spell was useful, but each had obvious flaws. The quickening charm was still just running. Momentum Arresto had short range. The side-along apparition had limited distance and a cooldown. The flying charm was slow. He needed something more comprehensive. The room of requirement answered. It became an empty training field, the floor dark wooden planks, the ceiling so high it vanished, and several floating magical lights casting even illumination. Regulus began with the simplest, the quickening charm. He pointed his wand at himself and incanted, Celeritas. Magic flowed from the wand tip into him. His skin emitted that faint white glow, but otherwise there was no immediate sensation. He took a step and his body was launched like a projectile, instantly crossing 10 meters. It was effectively accelerated running, powerful, but turning and emergency stops were restricted. Next, he tried Momentum Arresto. He traced the required path with his wand and spoke, Momentum Arresto. His body glided and his speed surged. Straight-line sprinting felt excellent, and turning was more flexible than with the quickening charm, but the distance was short, less than 10 meters before it cut out. He selected a point 10 meters away, concentrated, and with a burst of magic flicked his wand. Side-along apparition. His body instantaneously appeared at the target location. The side-along apparition felt stable and smooth, with almost no discomfort. He tried it several times. The effective distance maxed out at about 15 meters, beyond which success fell off sharply. Each use required a cooldown of roughly 2 seconds. Considering how powerful the anti-apparition charm in Hogwarts was, the method would probably be more effective outside school. The flying charm was the most awkward. He hovered half a meter in the air and glided forward by channeling magic. It was slow. Turning and braking demanded fine magical control, and a slight lapse would leave him off balance. Adjusting posture in the air ate 3 times as much energy as moving on the ground. Regulus stood in the center of the field and reviewed the strengths and weaknesses of each spell. Quickening offered a strong burst, but still relied on legs. Momentum Arresto gave fast straight-line speed but had short range. Side-along apparition was flexible but short-ranged and required cooldowns. The flying charm worked over obstacles and offered vertical advantage but was difficult to control and energy-intensive. Each spell alone had clear limitations. But what if they were combined? Regulus stood still, replaying the sequence in his head. Within the 2-second cooldown of the side-along apparition, trigger the quickening charm to keep your speed. On a straightaway, switch to Momentum Arresto to accelerate. When you need to turn or stop suddenly, go back to the quickening charm. If you meet an obstacle or need higher ground, use the flying charm to clear it, and the instant you land, follow up with a side-along apparition to reposition. The secret was in the transitions. Switching spells costs time. Even a fraction of a second could be fatal. He had to practice the swaps until they were instinctual, so his body could begin channeling magical energy for the next spell before the first one had completely faded. He wasn't inventing new magic, just combining familiar tools into a workflow. Like keeping a wrench, a screwdriver, and a hammer within reach. You use whichever you need, but you must be fast and precise. He thought briefly of Lord Voldemort's broomless flight. That thing moved like smoke. No broom, no thestral, utterly contrary to conventional flight. When Voldemort first used it, members of the Order of the Phoenix were stunned. Even Moody, who had experienced more threats than most, had been shocked, and then he died. Most Death Eaters, even the core ones like Bellatrix and Barty, relied on brooms. Voldemort's flight was a monopoly. Officially, a few confidants had been taught, but in truth, only Snape had truly mastered it. Voldemort had kept it as an exclusive privilege. That Snape learned it was partly talent and partly the Dark Lord's trust. Regulus didn't doubt he could learn it too. There was no reason he couldn't do what Snape could. The problem was getting Voldemort to teach him, or getting Snape to teach him. That thought was far off for now, maybe possible in the future, or perhaps he could develop something similar himself. He brought his thoughts back and raised his wand. First attempt, the side-along apparition finished, and he reappeared 10 meters away. But by the time he hit the ground, his magical energy was only beginning to prepare the quickening charm. That half-second lag would be enough for an enemy to finish a killing curse. The second attempt was better. While the apparition was still taking effect, he had already started channeling for quickening, and the moment he landed, his speed kicked in. But when he tried to switch to momentum arresto to make a sharp turn, his energy couldn't keep up, and he nearly slammed into a wall. Third, fourth, fifth attempts. The spells themselves weren't hard. Quickening made you run fast. Momentum arresto let you slide and change direction quickly. Side-along apparition handled short-range repositioning, and the flying charm carried you low over obstacles. The difficulty was using the right spell at the right instant and making sure there were no gaps during the swaps. For Regulus, this wasn't impossible. His perception of magic was refined enough to know precisely when an effect took hold and when it was fading. His brain could simultaneously predict paths, prepare the next spell, and adjust his output, 3 things at once. It was like playing 3 games of wizard's chess at the same time. Others would struggle, but for him it was routine. An hour later, he moved fluidly across the training ground. He dashed with a side-along apparition into a quickening, switched to momentum arresto for a sharp turn, used the flying charm to clear a low wall, and the moment he touched down, he apparated again to create distance. The little white flash of quickening streaked along his body. His feet left an arc from momentum arresto, his form blurred with apparitional displacement, and the brief lift from flying charm marked each crossing. The 4 effects alternated with almost no pause between them. Still, the tactic had limits. If he were completely surrounded, like in the cramped passage by the astronomy tower with no room to maneuver, no amount of movement could avoid every attack. It improved his mobility. As long as he didn't end up boxed in, it would be enough. Most wizard fights were against people, and people couldn't match this kind of fluid repositioning. Regulus stopped, breathing steady. The mana consumption was reasonable. Wizards who specialized in combat must have trained this side of things. Professor Flitwick had won dueling championships. He wasn't relying on his legs alone for positioning. Aurors and duelists couldn't lean only on apparition when facing dark wizards. Anti-apparition charms existed, and survival required mastering varied means of movement. He'd neglected that before, focused too much on advanced magic and forgetting that ordinary techniques were the foundation of real combat. His father, Orion, hadn't reminded him. Perhaps it was too early, or perhaps he wanted Regulus to find it himself. Luckily, he had. He exited the room of requirement and re-entered with a different mental picture. The room obliged, and the training ground reconfigured into a ruined courtyard. Broken stone pillars, collapsed walls, pits, and obstacles. 16 training dummies were planted in the corners. They could move, and each held a fake wand. The tips of those wands were beginning to condense magical energy. The first dummy fired a red beam, a repelling charm. He side-along apparated 3 meters to the left, and the spell grazed past. The moment he landed, he hit quickening and dove behind the nearest pillar. The second dummy chased. He put on momentum arresto and slid through the narrow gap, the spell striking the pillar and sending rubble showering down. A third ambushed from the side. He flicked the flying charm and rose half a meter to clear a low wall. Midair, the 4th dummy fired. His side-along apparition had just cooled down and he vanished, reappearing 5 meters behind cover. Spells came from all directions. He moved constantly, twisting and turning. Side-along apparition to dodge fatal attacks, quickening to close or retreat, momentum arresto to weave through cluttered terrain, flying charm to clear obstructions. He used the 4 in rotation until a rhythm formed. There was physical strain. High-speed movement brought inertia. Sudden stops and turns battered muscles and joints. But his body, hardened by star orbit meditation, held up, and his magical expenditure stayed manageable. After 40 minutes of continuous movement, his breathing was only a little heavy. The dummies fell silent, and the courtyard returned to stillness. He sheathed his wand. The tactic had taken shape. It wasn't perfect, but usable. The rest would be honed in real combat, adjusting order and timing to fit the situation. Regulus knew the combination's fundamental flaw. It was still, at best, a ground-bound form of flight. The flying charm could lift him, but not high or fast enough to use the air as cover. Up there, he'd be exposed and slow. That kind of flight was for crossing obstacles, not for primary movement. What he needed was true unassisted flight, magic that let him move freely in the air, no broom or beast required. Voldemort's broomless flight was the ideal, drifting like smoke, fast, flexible, enduring, able to hover. Its first appearance had been when the Order escorted Harry to 12 Grimmauld Place. Voldemort used it to kill Moody and even Hedwig in passing. A terrifying display. Regulus had no reason to know how that magic worked, and it would be dangerous to advertise a desire to learn it. He was certain that if he asked, Voldemort would be delighted to instruct him. Knowledge had value in that circle, and asking would come with a cost. He wondered about the principles of that flight. Was it dark magic? Probably. Voldemort used plenty of dark arts, but not all powerful magic is evil. Voldemort must know proper, non-dark techniques too. His mastery was deep. Perhaps that flight was a fusion of several systems. Regulus didn't have the evidence to say. He hadn't even seen the spell structure or gesture, if any. For now, he swallowed the questions and focused on the practical, perfect the ground-bound tactics. He left the room of requirements still tweaking details in his head. Could two side-along apparitions be chained? Could another spell mask an apparition's cooldown? Back in the dormitory, Avery and Alex were asleep. The rustle behind the bed curtains and the even sound of breathing told him the room was quiet. Regulus lay down, eyes closed. Tomorrow at 10, he was due in Dumbledore's office. The last talk under the astronomy tower had been rushed. This would be formal. What would Dumbledore ask? Ideals? Paths? The future? Regulus didn't know, but he wasn't anxious. From the astronomy tower incident and his frequent trips to the restricted section, Dumbledore's stance had already been clear. He wouldn't interfere unnecessarily, but he'd offer guidance at the right time. Regulus remembered the light at Dumbledore's fingertips. That kind of heavy-handed, forceful steering, reserved for Tom Riddle, wouldn't be used on him. Whatever Dumbledore had seen and thought over these years should be enough for him to adjust his approach. If Dumbledore intended to control or restrict him, Regulus curled his lips in the dark. There was nothing he could do. He wouldn't drop out of school, but he judged the chance of that happening to be very small. It was 9:50 a.m. on Saturday when Regulus stood before the gargoyle on the 8th floor of Hogwarts. The stone creature crouched on its pedestal with its eyes closed, as if dozing. He knew a password was usually required, but Dumbledore had not told him one. He waited a few seconds, and without a word, the gargoyle shifted. With a dull grind of stone joints, it hopped aside, and the wall behind it rotated open to reveal a spiraling staircase. The steps rose of their own accord. Regulus stepped on, and the staircase carried him upward, finally stopping before a heavy oak door. A brass knocker, shaped like a griffin, hung on the wood. He rapped 3 times. The door opened by itself. The principal's office was a wide, circular room. Portraits of past headmasters crowded the walls, some seated comfortably in their frames, others standing, some reading, some nodding off, all watching Regulus's entrance with various degrees of curiosity. Beneath them, dark wooden bookshelves were crammed with thick tomes and oddly shaped silver instruments. In the center of the room stood a massive desk piled with parchment, ink bottles, a number of peculiar mechanical devices, and a crystal ball that exhaled a faint vapor. By the window stood a tall, gilded perch. Fawkes the Phoenix sat there, its gold and red plumage and long tail feathers catching the sunlight so they seemed to burn. When Regulus entered, Fawkes turned its head. Its dark, bright eyes reflected his figure, and it gave a clear, bell-like cry. The air was a mixture of scents: the must of old books, the astringent tang of parchment, the cloying sweetness of candy, the faint smell of charred feathers, and underneath it all, the distinct scent of 25. Regulus's gaze swept the portraits until it rested on the one he'd been looking for, Phineas Nigellus Black. His great-great-grandfather, one of Hogwarts' least popular headmasters and uniquely authoritative among the Blacks, sat in an armchair within his frame, holding a copy of the Daily Prophet. He peered at Regulus over the top of the paper. Their eyes met. Phineas gave the tiniest of nods, almost imperceptible, then lifted the newspaper to hide his face again. Regulus understood. The portraits drew their life from the castle's magic. So long as the 23 stood, they endured. They could move among linked frames, seeing and hearing many things. Phineas, with a portrait also in the Black family home, likely knew of the astronomy tower incident, perhaps even details Dumbledore himself did not, but he had said nothing. Family came first, even in death. Of course, there was a caveat, so long as it didn't endanger Hogwarts. Dumbledore looked up from a pile of documents behind the desk. He wore a deep blue robe embroidered with silver stars that morning. The blue of his eyes, behind his half-moon spectacles, was bright and kind. "Ah, Mr. Black, right on time," he said, rising to come around the desk. "Please, sit." Regulus did. The chair was soft, its armrests carved with fine patterns. "Thank you, Headmaster Dumbledore," he said politely. Dumbledore returned to his seat and picked up a jar from a silver tray. "Lemon sherbet, cockroach clusters, or fizzing whizbees," he offered. The jar opened to reveal brightly colored sweets. The cockroach clusters wriggled conspicuously, a dense throng that issued the faint, characteristic rustle of many tiny legs. Regulus stared at them for a moment, then, unable to resist, asked, "Professor, when you eat cockroach clusters, do you ever check to be sure there aren't any real cockroaches mixed in?" Dumbledore froze, the jar in his hand. He blinked, looked at the jar, looked at Regulus, then back at the jar. Slowly he set it down, stroked his beard, and his gaze shifted away. He said, evasive. "That's an interesting question." He considered it with the gravity of someone weighing the principles of a complex charm, then pushed the jar aside as if deciding not to pursue the topic. Regulus noticed Dumbledore's already noticeable nose twitch. He thought it seemed a touch more crooked for the moment. "Perhaps tea would be better," Dumbledore said, waving his hand. A teapot and 2 cups appeared on the desk. The pot tipped and poured steaming 7 tea. "Sugar? Milk? Plain is fine, thank you." Regulus took the cup and used the moment to look around more deliberately. The portraits were quietly observant. Fawkes preened its feathers. The sky outside was a clear blue, and beyond the window, the black lake and the outline of the forbidden forest could be seen. Dumbledore sipped, set his cup down with a soft clink, and leaned forward with his hands folded on the desk. "First, Regulus, may I call you that?" "Of course, Headmaster," Regulus answered. "Good." Dumbledore's smile softened. "Actually, I prefer Professor. Headmaster makes things a little formal." He gave a small, encouraging look. Regulus felt an odd warmth at the intimacy of the title. "Professor Dumbledore," he echoed, and the lines at the corners of Dumbledore's eyes relaxed. "I didn't bring you here for anything grave," Dumbledore said, his tone easy. "Just a chat. I like to know my students, especially the remarkable ones." Regulus listened, drinking his tea. "You did very well at the astronomy tower," Dumbledore continued approvingly. "Calm, decisive, you put your companion's safety first during a crisis. Not many adults manage that." "I only did what had to be done," Regulus said, modest. "Many people know what should be done," Dumbledore replied, his fingers tracing the teacup's rim, "but they cannot act in the moment. Courage is not the absence of fear, but acting despite it." He studied Regulus's face. "Your Patronus is beautiful, a starry sky kite. Rare." "Thank you." Regulus had heard the remark before. Dumbledore repeating it felt significant. "A Patronus reflects one's deepest wishes," Dumbledore said conversationally, the meaning folded into the remark. "The starry sky, freedom, exploration, grand ambitions." Regulus wanted, for a moment, to tell him that Dumbledore's own pursuits, rebirth, protection, were noble as well, but he kept the thought to himself. The portraits remained silent. Phineas kept one edge of his paper lifted and half an eye watching. Fawkes spread its wings once, dew of gold and crimson flashing. It cried out again, a longer, patterned call. Dumbledore smiled. "Fawkes seems interested in you. Phoenixes see souls. They are drawn to hearts that are pure and warm." Regulus felt the praise to be too generous. He did not consider his heart especially pure or warm. Perhaps birds saw things differently. "Professor," he switched topics, "what happened to the 6? How was it handled?" "It was sealed. Dumbledore said simply. It should not exist. The crimes of Valentino Solito must not become instruments for future generations seeking power. Though calm, Dumbledore's words carried authority. Regulus thought of the suffering behind them, the 70,000, the makeshift dementors, the centuries of curses, and felt the weight of the action concealed by Dumbledore's understatement. He looked at the old man across the desk. Dumbledore had the kind of power that could reshape the world, yet he chose to remain at Hogwarts, to teach, to talk with students, to eat questionable candies, and to handle grave matters only when necessary. Regulus did not know whether that was prudence or restraint, fear or wisdom, but he recognized the consequence, power possessed but rarely used. "Professor," Regulus said, setting his cup down, "you didn't call me here just to praise my Patronus, did you?" Dumbledore's smile deepened, gentler and more serious at once. It was the look of someone who had finally hooked the fish. "Yes and no," he admitted. "I have a question for you. You may answer, or you may refuse. It is entirely your choice." Regulus straightened. Dumbledore watched him for a moment, then asked quietly, "How do you view 25? Chapter 112, Verifying the Roadmap. After Dumbledore asked that question, the headmaster's office fell silent. The portraits on the walls seemed to hold their breath. Some pretended to read, others pretended to doze, but all their gazes drifted to this spot. Phineas Black still held the Daily Prophet in front of his face, the paper pressed low so only the rims of his eyes showed. Regulus did not answer at once. He was weighing how much of the truth to reveal. This was not about politics or choosing a side. It was about a fundamental understanding of 21. The one asking was Dumbledore. If Professor Flitwick could detect Regulus's shifts, the headmaster almost certainly could. Half measures or evasions would be pointless. They would squander the moment. But he need not say everything. What he could offer was his direction, his grasp of 21's essence, and the outline of his own path. Speaking to Dumbledore was also a way of speaking to himself, uttering his thoughts aloud for confirmation. He looked up and met Dumbledore's eyes. "At first," Regulus said, his voice calm, "I thought 21 could be completely deconstructed." Dumbledore leaned forward, elbows on the desk, fingers interlaced beneath his chin. "Space magic has structure. Transfiguration has laws. Even the power of magical plants can be categorized by tendencies and attributes," he said. "I felt that once one understood the principles, performed the calculations, and exercised precise control, 21 could be thoroughly mastered." Regulus's tone was steady as he continued. "I divided spellcasting into steps, derived variants through logic, and believed rationality could cover all of 21. His gaze flicked briefly to the window where the canopy of the forbidden forest rolled in the wind. "And I proved some of it." There was little pride in his voice, but Dumbledore heard it. "I'm good at this, perceiving the flow of 21, calculating output, and adjusting control. These things come naturally to me." A portrait muttered, "Another theoretician." Someone nearby shushed the comment. Regulus ignored it and went on, "Until I summoned my Patronus." He drew his 22 and looked back at Dumbledore. The headmaster's eyebrows rose, an encouraging spark in his face, his blue eyes bright with expectation. Expecto Patronum. A silver-white light rose from the tip of his 22, condensing and stretching until it took the shape of a starry sky kite. The Patronus circled once above the headmaster's office, its wings scattering fine starlight, its clear, high cry ringing in the circular room. Fawkes stirred on his perch, gold and red feathers ruffling as he answered with a warm, bright call. The starry sky kite flew close to the 19. The two regarded one another across the air, one a real creature, the other a creation of magic. Fawkes tilted his head, and the Patronus gently beat its wings. Regulus watched them as he spoke. "On the cliffs of Ireland, I wasn't thinking of summoning it," he said. "I felt a longing for freedom, an urge to see the world. Looking at the sea and the sky, I was moved. The world is so vast, and there is so much 21 can do." The starry sky kite returned and landed on the back of his chair. "In that moment, I realized that 21 is not only a force to be calculated and controlled." He smiled at the memory. "It is also alive. It changes with the wizard's emotions. When I am calm, it is precise and stable. When I am moved, it becomes lively and joyous. Those two states aren't necessarily opposed." He raised his left hand, palm up. A wisp of silver white rose from his fingertips, rotating slowly and tracing intricate geometric patterns that shifted with precise motion. Magic can be a precise science, requiring calculation, logic, and rigorous derivation. But 21 can also be vivid, warm, and full of infinite possibility. He watched the wisp dissolve, then lowered his hand. The key lies in how the wizard perceives it and how they use it. Later, Professor Flitwick told him that 21 was right there. One must believe in the existence of that other side of 21, believe in one's understanding, and believe in the power of the heart. Because 21 sometimes responds in the most unexpected moments. It is not always rational, not always logical, but it is real. He paused, gathering his final thought. Opposite him, Dumbledore listened intently, a flicker of recognition in his eyes as he looked at Regulus, almost as if seeing his younger self. The headmaster's expression grew profound, traveling back through time to decades past, to someone who once spoke with him about 21 in similar terms. Regulus's voice pulled him back. Dumbledore reached up and brushed a stray tear from the corner of his eye. "Now I feel that 21 follows two parallel paths," Regulus said, earnest and resolute. "On one side are laws that can be understood, like space magic and transfiguration. These improve with study and practice. On the other side is the elusive mystery, like the Patronus. It depends on emotion, faith, and the deepest longings of the soul, and it can't be exhausted by logic." He looked to Dumbledore, waiting for a response. The office stayed quiet for a few seconds. The portraits exchanged glances. Some nodded, some shook their heads. Phineas Black lowered his paper at last, revealing his whole face. The mocking smirk was gone. In its place was a steady gaze fixed on Regulus. Dumbledore slowly leaned back in his chair, tapped his fingers twice on the desk, and smiled. He lifted his teacup, drank, and set it down. "Regulus," he said softly, "you have perceived the essence of 21 far earlier than many adult wizards." Regulus straightened. "Too many people spend their lives worrying whether 21 should be analyzed or felt," Dumbledore continued, stroking his silver beard. "Some are obsessed with formulas and principles, turning 21 into cold calculation. Others worship intuition and mystery blindly. They think they must choose one path and follow it to the end." He let his hand fall and fixed Regulus with a warm look. "But you have seen they are not opposite." Dumbledore's eyes shone with approval. "Rationality is the skeleton of 21. It lets you move steadily and far without being misled. Sensibility is the flesh and blood. It lets you walk with warmth and depth without being bound by rules." A portrait of a headmistress in a curly wig murmured, "Like a 19's nirvana, both the tempering of flame and the conviction of rebirth are required." Dumbledore smiled and nodded toward her. Regulus offered a polite nod in return. "To say that 21 can be mastered is courage," Dumbledore said. "To admit it is a mystery worthy of awe is wisdom. Many forget awe as they grow powerful and try to conquer everything with logic. Yet the most enchanting parts of 21 are precisely those that cannot be analyzed. The resonance between heart and 21, the meeting of faith and miracle." Hearing this, Regulus felt something like relief, like walking alone for a long time and suddenly encountering a fellow traveler who had already gone far enough to turn and say, "Your direction is right." That confirmation mattered. Had Dumbledore rejected him, he would not have abandoned his path. He would have thought harder and argued more rigorously. But recognition from the century's greatest tween was invigorating. He decided to press the moment. "Professor," Regulus asked, "at the astronomy tower, you said that beam of light carried only a bit of brightness. What did you mean by that?" Dumbledore's eyes lit up as if a cherished question had finally arrived. "Do you believe light must defeat darkness?" he asked in return, steering the thought. "Attribute suppression," Regulus answered. "The Patronus repels dementors. Light 21 suppresses dark curses. That's common sense." "Common sense can limit one's vision." Dumbledore leaned forward, hands folded on the desk. "When I was young, I wanted to use spells to eliminate darkness. Later, I realized darkness cannot be eliminated." Regulus frowned. He knew darkness couldn't simply be erased. "Shadows follow light," Dumbledore continued. "But light need not chase shadows. If the light is bright enough, the shadows recede on their own, losing the conditions needed to exist. He raised his right hand, index finger extended. A gentle white point of light appeared at the tip, not as intense as the beam under the astronomy tower, but soft and steady. The halo drifted toward Regulus and settled on his 22. The wand's tip glowed faintly for a few seconds, then faded. When you used the shield charm to block the gray mist, that was confrontation, Dumbledore said. If you first let your 22 become a vessel for light, the gray mist will avoid it of its own accord. Light 21 is not about attacking darkness. It is about not being assimilated by darkness. Regulus stared at his 22, his mind working swiftly. Confrontation versus existence. Active attack versus natural repulsion. The former expends 21 to neutralize negative energy. The latter uses one's own attributes to create an environment in which the negative cannot sustain itself. It was a more advanced approach, moving from head-on clashes to suppression at the level of qualities. Chapter 113, The White Space of Magic. Magic is not an opponent for you to conquer. Dumbledore's voice pulled him back. You must treat it as a friend, converse with it. True mastery of magic is letting the world do things for you. Let the world do things for you. Regulus turned the sentence over in his mind. He agreed. He'd nearly reached the same conclusion on his own. Wizards use will and magic to influence the world, and the world responds. The reasoning was sound, but while Dumbledore might be able to do it, Regulus knew he could not, at least not yet. He was still far from that level. Take potion-making as an example. Dumbledore shifted his view. Professor Slughorn teaches you to control the heat, prepare the ingredients, and watch the direction and frequency of your stirring. But the finest potions, like Felix Felicis, often require leaving a little time for the magic to ferment on its own. You cannot rush it. You cannot be impatient. You must wait for the ingredients to find their own places. He traced his fingers in the air, as if stirring an invisible cauldron. Magic is the same. Not every spell must squeeze out every last drop of effect. Sometimes leaving room, giving magic space to breathe, is a higher art. Regulus remembered how he cast spells, precise calculations, strict control of output, conserving every ounce of magic for what mattered. That method was not wrong, efficient, effective. But Dumbledore was proposing another possibility. Some magic didn't need to be poured full force into a single channel. Leaving some slack could produce more natural, longer-lasting outcomes. But that doesn't mean you do nothing, Dumbledore continued. It means you do what must be done, then let the rest happen. When confronting darkness, the most important thing isn't how much you can destroy, but how much you can illuminate. Regulus fell silent. The language was abstract. He needed to digest it. The portraits on the walls listened in hush. Phineas Black watched Dumbledore with a complicated expression, as if wondering why the headmaster would say so much to a boy who might be drawn to darker paths. Fawkes gave a soft cry, flew down from his perch, and landed on the desk's edge. The phoenix cocked its head and regarded Regulus, bright eyes reflecting his figure. Regulus found himself slightly unsettled. Fawkes's look had the same patient curiosity as Dumbledore's. Everything I've said today, Dumbledore leaned back, a gentleness in his smile, is a sharing. Then he changed the subject. Everyone must ultimately find their own path. Other people's experiences can only be referenced, not copied. He raised his hand. The teapot on the table tipped of its own accord and refilled both cups with hot tea. But for now, I think you're on the right track, Dumbledore said, lifting his cup. Keep walking, Regulus. Carry your rationality, but also carry your emotions. Carry your calculations, but also carry your awe. Magic will not fail a wizard like that. Regulus took his cup. The tea was cool, but it still gave off a faint fragrance. He realized Dumbledore had not taught him a single new spell today, nor revealed any arcane secret. Everything had been philosophy, distilled experience, perspective on how magic and the world interact. Those were more precious than any single trick, a map and a compass rather than the treasure itself. Thank you, Professor, Regulus said solemnly. Dumbledore blinked beneath his beard, the corners of his mouth lifting. You're welcome, he replied lightly. Honestly, I enjoy this sort of conversation. There aren't many at Hogwarts who can talk like this. A portrait on the wall huffed. The last one to chat like this was Dillis, Dumbledore interrupted gently. The portrait of Principal Dillis pursed her lips and fell silent. Regulus understood enough to know the unspoken name. Tom Riddle. He finished his tea, stood, and bowed. I should go now, Professor. I need to digest this. Of course. Dumbledore rose and stood with him, looking reluctant. Are you sure you won't try a cockroach cluster? Honestly, there. No. Regulus refused without hesitation. Sk, what a pity. Dumbledore clicked his tongue. Regulus ignored the chide, bowed again, and thanked him. He inclined his head to the portraits, nodded to Fawkes, and reached for the doorknob. Regulus. Dumbledore's voice called from behind him. He turned. Remember, the headmaster said, standing where he was, his gaze steady. No matter which path you choose, Hogwarts will always be your school. A school is a place for people to make mistakes. There were layers in the sentence. Regulus understood them. I understand, Professor. He pushed the door open and left. The spiral staircase carried him down to the 8th floor corridor. In the headmaster's office, Dumbledore watched the door close. The portraits began to whisper among themselves about the Slytherin boy who had just departed. Phineas Black folded his newspaper and remarked, You've invested a great deal in him, Albus. I invest in all my students, Phineas. Dumbledore sat behind his desk. But I do not have conversations like that with every one of them. He reached for the cockroach cluster, reconsidered, and plucked a lemon sherbet from the silver tray instead, popping it into his mouth. Not every student is ready to hear these things, he said, muffled by candy. Fawkes gave a long, bird-like cry and flapped his wings. Lunchtime. The great hall filled with the scent of roast beef and mashed potatoes. Regulus sat at the Slytherin table, fork in hand, his mind still turning over Dumbledore's words. In the end, there was one main point. Magic needs white space. Do not always use full force. Leave some to magic itself. Do what must be done, and let the rest happen naturally. He understood the logic. The difficulty was finding the balance. He'd always prized total control. Now he had to learn to allow room for the unpredictable, like a precision instrument tolerating a margin of error. Still, he could try. Dumbledore had led the way. Following him felt right. As he chewed, Regulus looked across the hall. The Gryffindor table was loud and boisterous. Ravenclaw spoke in quieter tones. Hufflepuff's laughter drifted across. Slytherin remained the calmest. Hogwarts was a marvelous place. The teachers were remarkable. McGonagall, Flitwick, Sprout, Slughorn, and now Dumbledore. They taught him more than spells and potion recipes. They taught him how to see magic, how to approach problems, how to live. He thought again of Dumbledore's last words, a permission, perhaps, an understanding granted in advance. Dumbledore must know the position of the Black family. The pull of dark alliances among pureblood families could not be unknown to the headmaster. Yet he had chosen to speak to Regulus with such care. The reason was not merely that Regulus was a promising young wizard. The deeper reason was that, in the contest between Dumbledore and Lord Voldemort, Regulus was noticed by both sides. Viewed rationally, the headmaster was planning ahead, placing his bets. Regulus did not dislike being invested in. Dumbledore's investment took the shape of wisdom and guidance, far preferable to many other kinds of interest. If magic needed balance, control and surrender, reason and feeling, action and patience, so did life. Family duty and personal ideals, pure-blood standing and the pursuit of mastery, Dumbledore's expectations and the shadow of Voldemort. He swallowed the last bite and sipped pumpkin juice. Regulus, a voice called from the entrance. Avery and Alex pushed through, their robes splattered with mud, unmelted snow caught in their hair, cheeks red from the cold. Avery flopped down opposite Regulus. Alex shook snow off his sleeves before sitting. The snow stopped and the sun's out, Avery said, grabbing a roll and shoving it into his mouth. Want to go play? Alex added, quieter. We could have a snowball fight. Regulus looked at them. Invitations like this were rare. To them, asking Regulus to join was almost like inviting a professor to a student party, absurd in its way. He had always been off practicing in the library or the room of requirement, focused on spells with a purpose. But today felt different. He wanted to leave some room for the unplanned. All right, he said. Avery's mouth fell open, crumbs clinging to his lips. Alex's eyes widened. Regulus stood, shrugged into his cloak, and followed them out into the bright winter day. From the headmaster's office window, Dumbledore watched 3 figures cross the grounds. 2 ran laughing ahead, one strode more steadily behind, sometimes pausing to look at the scene around him. They reached the Black Lake, crouched by a hole in the ice for a while, then rose and walked back toward the castle. Dumbledore's mouth curved. He sipped his honey tea and set the cup down. Fawkes let out a soft sound from his perch, as if making an observation. "I know, Fawkes," Dumbledore murmured. "Give him some time. Give magic some time, too." Chapter 114, First Development of Spells. In March at Hogwarts, the snow was beginning to melt, and the ground around the castle showed patches of mottled brown mud. The weather was still cold, but the wind no longer cut to the bone as it had in the depths of winter. Occasionally sunlight peeked through gaps in the clouds, making the damp stone walls glimmer faintly. Regulus stood in the room of requirement with his wand hanging at his side. A phrase had been looping in his head for 2 weeks. Magic needs blank space. Do not use full force. The principle was simple. Do what needs to be done and let the magical energy finish the rest, but the specifics were uncertain. How exactly should one operate? How much blank space should be left? How much force used? There were no standard answers. He stared at a stone platform 3 meters away. A galleon sat on its surface. It had become the standard target for his practice of space leap. The problem was obvious. Space leap was the slowest to progress among all his magical developments. He could already move small objects. He could reach 5 meters, reduce placement error to 2 centimeters, and friction in the local space had decreased. But it was still far from practical. True mastery meant he could move himself. His previous method had been direct: lock onto the target with spatial perception and learn its structure. Use his magical perception and calculations to set output and frequency of magical energy. Fold space with magic and force the object through the passage. The whole process relied on continuous, precise control, brute forcing things from one point to another. Dumbledore's words showed him where the problem lay. He was trying too hard. Space leap had become a pure chore of exertion, missing the part that magic ought to contribute naturally. He thought of building a house. He had been hauling bricks and laying walls by hand, forgetting pulleys and scaffolding existed. Perhaps space leap required an incantation and a gesture, not to make magic look like magic for its own sake, but to give the magical energy a framework, a structure, a guide to tell it what to do. He began to experiment. For the first time, he raised his wand and formed syllables of an incantation in his mind. He referenced the spell structure of apparition. After all, that was the most developed form of space magic among wizards. Apparition's core was a clear target and integrity of self. Space leap required a clear path and precise positioning. He tried chanting a first draft of the incantation while tracing a corresponding trajectory with his wand. Failure. The galleon didn't budge. The magical energy pooled at the wand's tip with nowhere to go. He wasn't surprised. New spells weren't born on a whim. The stories about legendary wizards inventing spells instantly were romanticized. The reality was a grind of trial and error. Some minor charms could be discovered quickly, but space leap was not minor. He had an advantage, though. Spatial perception let him see how magical energy interacted with spatial structure, and his control of magical energy let him fine-tune the effects. Most important, he knew the essence of space leap. It only required bending space locally so 2 points touched temporarily. He knew what effect he wanted the magical energy to achieve. That was far more efficient than blind experimentation. He started recording data. With every attempt, he could perceive the flow of magical energy through space. Which syllables strengthened resonance with space, which gestures stabilized the structure, which combinations caused magical disorder. On the 23rd try, the galleon trembled. On the 37th, it vanished for half a second and reappeared 2 centimeters away. On the 52nd attempt, it moved 1 meter with a 3-centimeter deviation. He kept adjusting. Regulus did not rely on sudden inspiration. He was not of the intuitive school of magic. He favored data analysis and logical deduction. Every failure was a data point, every small success a verification. For nearly 2 weeks after class each day, he experimented in the room of requirement, waving his wand and murmuring incantations as the galleon vanished and returned in different places. One evening in mid-March, he stood at the center of the training area, wand raised. This time felt different. As the incantation formed, the magical energy began to flow in anticipation. No longer needing continuous driving, it advanced naturally along a path. His gesture traced, and the spatial structure itself responded, making way for a passage. Space leap. The tip of his wand glowed with a faint silver light, almost transparent but visible in the dim room. The trajectory of the wand left ripples in the air. Space itself fluctuated. Then the galleon disappeared, not by sliding along any visible path, but instantly. One moment it sat on the stone platform, the next it appeared on another table 5 meters away, landed precisely in the center. Regulus stood motionless, staring at the coin. A book slid off a shelf and popped onto the floor exactly as he had pictured it, covered down at the precise angle he'd imagined. For the third test, he chose a smaller target, a sickle. The coin leapt 3 times in succession, from the left shelf to the right table, then to the floor in front of him, and finally back into his palm. Each leap took less than half a second. Landing error was under a centimeter. He stopped and breathed, heart beating a little faster. He had succeeded. It was no longer merely usable. The spell was complete. Space Leap now had fixed syllables, standard gestures, and a repeatable casting process. Any wizard with sufficient magical energy, a clear mind, and mastery of the incantation could, in theory, learn it. He picked up the galleon. It was cold and a little worn at the edges. This ability had taken him more than half a year, from the first perception of spatial folds, to modeling the movement of house elves, to today's final form. It had at last transformed from Regulus's personal knack into a teachable spell. The significance was enormous. It wasn't just an increase in personal strength, it proved a path was viable. Wizards could learn the space magic house elves used and even refine it for wizardly use. He began testing limits. Distance-wise, anything within line of sight could be moved. A water cup 20 meters away, a chair 30 meters, a map 50 meters on a wall, they all transferred precisely. Error grew with distance, but within 50 meters, it stayed under 5 centimeters. Object size had limits. An armchair was about the largest item he could move stably. Anything bigger destabilized the spatial structure and sent magical energy consumption skyrocketing. Repeated use had a cooldown. Space needed about a second to re-stabilize after each cast, and casting more than 10 times in rapid succession noticeably increased landing error. But all this was normal. Every magic had its constraints. Regulus sheathed his wand and tried a wandless cast. His fingers traced the trajectory in the air, and he chanted softly. The galleon vanished and reappeared 3 meters away. Success on the first try. He observed the casting closely. Wandless, the magical flow felt more direct and cost slightly more energy, but the effect was identical. Once a spell had a fixed form, casting became easier. The tool mattered less. Incantation and gesture were keys. Once the door was open, the particular key mattered little. Dumbledore had told him to let the world do things for you. Now Regulus understood it. Previously, he had tried to brute force space, which was stubborn. Now, having found the right method, the world cooperated. Space Leap did not change the essence of space. It provided a way to act in accordance with spatial laws, and magical energy did the rest. As he left the room of requirement, another thought occurred to him. Why did the House of Black's inherited magics, natural magic and the Space Anchor Charm, lack fixed incantations? The Space Anchor Charm made sense. Its effect was well-defined and its applications fixed. After practice, he could maintain 5 anchors for 20 minutes. But natural magic? The ancestor Eldrin had been unusually talented and could resonate directly with nature's essence. For someone of that level, an incantation might truly be redundant. Talent can make abilities instinctive, but inheritance is supposed to be teachable. If natural magic required talent to even begin, would Eldrin not have tried to solve that? Would he not have recorded a method? Regulus let his thoughts wander. Perhaps natural magic was meant to have no fixed form. Everyone's way of resonating with nature differs, the point of perception is different, and the methods of guiding magical energy vary. Forcing a unified incantation might have stifled development. Regardless, he was no longer worried. With his experience developing Space Leap, if natural magic could be aided by an incantation, he could develop that incantation himself. Walking back to the dormitory, Regulus Black took stock of what he had accomplished in the first 2 months of the term. In Transfiguration, he hadn't yet broken through to elemental conversion, but his precision and the scope of his transformations had improved significantly. He could now give a diamond the layered structure of 46 while keeping its hardness unchanged. Incorporating starry sky imagery into his spells had exceeded his expectations. After adding it to the shield charm, its defensive power increased by about 50%, while 51 consumption only rose by 15%, a reasonable trade-off. Infusing Confringo with supernova explosion imagery doubled its power, though it also doubled the consumption, making it something to save for critical moments. More importantly, he discovered that different imageries could change a spell's nature. The same Incendio, infused with stellar combustion imagery, produced sustained high temperatures. With meteor fall imagery, it carried impact force. He had already internalized the ground chicken tactics. The cooldown for side-along apparition had been reduced to 1.5 seconds, and the transition between quickening charm and momentum arresto was nearly seamless. Although he still relied mainly on ground mobility, his survivability in complex environments had improved. Studying magical plants had advanced his attribute theory, the healing tendency of 47, the paralytic tendency of venomous tentacula, the predatory tendency of devil's snare, and the physical tendency of the homping willow. These tendencies, he realized, were the plant's inherent biases in their 51. Understanding them allowed more efficient guidance and utilization of Plant 51. His greatest achievement, however, was completing the Space Leap spell. Creating it from scratch and turning a personal ability into a teachable template. 51 proved his method worked. Observe phenomena, analyze principles, construct models, develop applications, plus a little bit of D1. But even that wasn't as important as another gain, confirmation of his magical path, reinforced by Albus Dumbledore's supplementary insights. Regulus now knew which direction he wanted to take, a balance between reason and feeling, where control and abandon coexisted. Do what must be done and let 51 handle the rest. Natural magic hadn't broken through yet. He could only repeat practice and wait for a quantitative change to trigger a qualitative one. Or perhaps his understanding of nature needed to deepen, which would require an opportunity he hadn't had. Fortunately, star orbit meditation was progressing steadily. Half of 41 had already lit up, and his mental strength continued to grow. As for Professor Sprout's sunlight ebony shrub, even if she permitted it, he wouldn't touch it now. The shrub required a pure light attribute he couldn't grasp. He couldn't become that light. To establish a 51 connection with it, he might need a different path, but he hadn't found that yet. Fiendfire had to be put on the back burner. He couldn't yet achieve attribute-level natural suppression the way Dumbledore had described. Still, the logic of Fiendfire, burning everything, could serve as a backup plan. He simply couldn't practice it at school and would have to wait until the holidays at home. When he pushed open the Slytherin dormitory door, Avery and Alex were playing wizard's chess. Both glanced up as he entered. "Hermes is being discharged tomorrow," Avery said, clutching a knight. "Are we going to pick him up?" Regulus nodded. "Yes," Alex added softly. "Madame Pomfrey said he's recovered. The curse has been cleared, but his body's still weak. He needs a few more days of rest." "That's good," Regulus said, taking off his robes and hanging them up. He truly hoped Hermes would become a genuine member of their circle. Avery and Alex each had their uses. Avery was a contact for future pureblood circles, less strong at spellcasting, but the natural spokesperson, while Alex was meticulous and cautious, good at handling details and rallying moderate purebloods. But in the end, A48 must speak through 51, and Hermes had that potential. His obsession with the dark arts was a problem, but it could be guided, controlled, even taught. The key would be what Hermes chose for himself. The astronomy tower incident had been an opportunity. The Mulciber family's stance was already clear. Now it was a matter of whether Hermes would keep pace. The next morning, the three of them went to the hospital wing. Hermes sat by a bed, already in clean robes. His face was still pale, but much better. He looked up when they entered and gave a quiet nod. Madame Pomfrey was bandaging another patient. She waved them off. "Take him away," she said. "No strenuous exercise, a light diet, and come back for a checkup in 3 days." Avery patted Hermes' shoulder. "Let's go. I've assembled a vast collection of fantasy novels to suit your tastes. Your bed in the dorm is almost buried under Alex's things." Alex blushed. "I was only putting them there temporarily." Hermes rose, movement still a bit slow, picked up a small cloth bag from the bedside, probably a change of clothes and personal items, and followed them out. As they passed another bed, Regulus caught a glimpse of Darren McNeil. Darren lay with the covers up to his chin, eyes closed, eyelids twitching. He was feigning sleep, escaping reality. Regulus knew Darren was awake. Madame Pomfrey's treatment was effective, and once the curse was cleared, physical recovery was only a matter of time. But Darren lay motionless and mute, like a breathing corpse. He was afraid. The mission had failed. The family had lost an important item. The 12 was now in Dumbledore's hands, and Darren himself was wounded and hospitalized. He knew what awaited him back at the McNair family. Regulus spared him only a glance before looking away. Darren had acted rashly, without adequate preparation, and had nowhere to hide after failing. As long as he remained at Hogwarts, his life would be safe. Dumbledore would not allow harm to come to a student on school grounds. But after leaving, how the McNairs handled failure was their concern. Regulus felt little sympathy. Everyone must accept responsibility for their choices. The four left the hospital wing and walked along the underground corridor. Avery rattled on about recent Quidditch matches. Alex chimed in occasionally. Hermes listened in silence, and Regulus walked at the front. Sunlight slanted through high windows, cutting bright bands across the stone floor. Sounds of students laughing came from a distance. The smell of boiling 50 ingredients drifted from a classroom. A lady in a portrait hummed an ancient song. The Slytherin dormitory door closed behind them. Avery tossed his bag onto his bed and pulled up a chair. Alex went to the window to look over the Black Lake. Several Sixtines swam slowly, their tentacles brushing the glass. Hermes stood in the center of the dormitory, still clutching his cloth bag. He did not go to his bed immediately or speak. He just stood. Regulus hung up his robes and turned to him. After a moment of silence, Hermes spoke. "Dumbledore told me," his voice raspier than before, as if he hadn't spoken in a long time, "about the astronomy tower." Regulus gestured for him to continue. "He said the three of you went to investigate because of me and caught Darren McNeil breaking the final call 29, which triggered the curse, and you almost didn't make it out." Hermes' gaze swept over Regulus, Avery, and Alex. He said if it hadn't been for you staying behind to cover the retreat, those two might not have made it. Regulus simply nodded. "It's good you've recovered. I just wanted to tell you what actually happened." Hermes walked to his bed and sat, tossing the bag onto the mattress. His eyes roved around the room as he spoke. "My family had me cooperate with McNair to break the 29 under the astronomy tower to get the item inside. They never told me exactly what it was, only that it was very important to the family's future. We worked on it for 2 months," he continued, looking at the floor. "McNair brought decoding tools from his home, and things were going smoothly, just as the 29 was about to break." He faltered, brow furrowing, his nose twitching as if recalling something painful. "I thought we were going to succeed, but at the last moment McNair used that crystal, the one with the gray mist, and released it toward me. I wasn't prepared, and it was too close to dodge." Regulus listened. It matched his deductions. 2 families cooperating, one side trying to betray the other at the final moment to claim everything. "And then I don't remember anything else," Hermes said. "When I woke up, I was in the hospital wing. Dumbledore told me it was over, that the item was sealed, and that Darren was injured." He looked at Regulus. "Did you find out the truth?" "We did," Regulus said, "but the specifics aren't convenient to discuss right now. You only need to know the matter has been resolved and Dumbledore handled it cleanly." Chapter 116. How do you want to compete? Hermes nodded without pressing the matter. He could tell Regulus didn't want to say more, and he could imagine some things were too tangled to explain. Why Regulus knew what he knew made no sense to Hermes, but he didn't question it. Silence stretched for a few more seconds. Avery tapped his fingers on the armrest, glancing between Hermes and Regulus. Alex remained by the window, turned sideways, staring at the center of the dormitory. Regulus watched Hermes carefully. In the past, Hermes had been sullen and aloof. his eyes carrying a kind of contempt for everything around him. That contempt had faded now, replaced by something more complex: gratitude, wariness, and something else Regulus couldn't quite name. Still, Hermes was Hermes, a Mulciber, born and raised on the dark arts, with the hunger for power and the pride to match. His pride wasn't like Avery's. Avery took pride in lineage, pure blood status, the weight of the Cuthbert name. Hermes's pride was in power itself, in the dark arts that could maim and kill, and in the fear the family name inspired. Regulus could guess what Hermes was thinking. He believed in his own strength and thought that in an unrestricted life-or-death fight, relying on those dark arts, he might win. Ebros Mulciber had probably told his son to keep an eye on Regulus at school, but Hermes needed to see for himself whether Regulus was worth following. So when Hermes lifted his head, fixed Regulus with his gaze, and said the words, Regulus wasn't surprised. "I want to fight you again." Avery sat up so quickly he nearly bounced his chair. Excitement lit his face. Alex frowned, opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, eyes locked on Regulus. Regulus met Hermes's stare. He looked pale, but his gaze was steady, and his fingers trembled only slightly, not from fear. Wizards felt adrenaline, too. "Why?" Regulus asked flatly. "Do I need a reason?" Hermes replied, cold and hard. "I want to know how strong you are. Last semester doesn't count. I wasn't ready, and you weren't serious." Regulus understood. Hermes wanted a decisive defeat or an unexpected victory to settle his own doubts. He wasn't convinced yet. He still believed he had tricks to play. Fine, thought Regulus. He needed to be shown the gap. Words wouldn't do, and bargaining by interest wasn't enough. Hermes had to experience the helplessness himself, the sense of being powerless, the despair of not seeing the gap. Only then might he put down his pride and consider following seriously. "Not in the dormitory," Regulus added. "There won't be room to move." He opened the door and walked out. Hermes was already to his feet. Avery followed eagerly, and Alex hesitated only a moment before trailing after them. They left the Slytherin common room and took the underground corridor upstairs. A few older students glanced at their group but asked nothing. Regulus led them to the 8th floor opposite the tapestry and walked back and forth a few times, searching for a space large enough for a duel. A wooden door appeared. He pushed it open. Inside was a proper dueling training ground. Avery stepped in first, his steps ringing on the wooden floor, eyes wide. "The room of requirement. It really exists," he breathed. Alex stepped carefully, testing the floor as if to be sure it was solid, his gaze flicking between ceiling and walls. Hermes came in last, glancing around with little interest in the room itself. Open, no obstacles, perfect for movement and spellcasting. His attention was entirely on Regulus. His wand was half raised before he forced himself to lower it. "Rules?" Hermes asked, the sound echoing in the empty arena. "You decide," Regulus replied, moving to the center and turning to face him. Avery and Alex slid back to the wall, folding themselves into the corners. Avery crossed his arms and lifted his chin, ready for a show. Alex stayed a step further back, nervous, eyes shifting between the two. Hermes stopped 10 meters from Regulus, drew a deep breath, and steadied his wand hand. "I want to know the real gap," he said. "So," he didn't finish. Regulus lifted his right hand a fraction, a casual crook of a finger, and the air rippled. A sharp pain seared Hermes's throat. A stone spike materialized from nothing, its tip pressing half a centimeter beneath his Adam's apple, just shallow enough to cut the skin and draw a bead of blood. The spike hovered there, as if it had always been part of the world. Hermes froze. He hadn't seen a spell, no flash, no movement. A second ago, the air had been empty. Now it held something that could take his life. Alex made a small gasp. Avery leaned forward, eyes wide, trying to take in every detail. Regulus didn't move, didn't even raise his wand. He simply watched Hermes with the calm of someone brushing dust off a sleeve. Hermes swallowed. The motion drove the spike another fraction into his skin. Warm blood trickled down his neck and soaked his collar. He backed away slowly, feet light and cautious. The spike didn't follow. It stayed fixed in midair, tip stained with his blood. After 2 meters, Hermes dared to touch the wound. The wet, sticky pressure under his fingers sent his heart pounding. Only then could he properly see the spike. 15 centimeters long, about the thickness of a wand, rough surface, sharp tip. It hovered, neither floating nor moving, as if nailed in place by an invisible peg. Just as he allowed himself a relieved breath, the spike began to rotate. At first one could track each turn, then it accelerated, blurring into a gray streak. Wind shrieked through the empty hall. It sped up more. Friction heated the stone until its surface glowed red. Heat shimmered around it, bending light, the red blur seeming to dance. The sound shifted from wind to a high, metallic scream. Avery stood open-mouthed, forgetting to breathe. Alex took a half step back and slid against the wall. Hermes watched the turning. Screaming red spike, and a memory from the dormitory last semester flashed through his mind. Regulus making the air fail and leaving him gasping on the floor. When he'd asked his father later, Ab Ross had called it an advanced application of transfiguration. Hermes hadn't believed it then, but feeling suffocation again and watching this now, he began to. What was this method? Still transfiguration? Transmuted from what? He swept the arena with his eyes. It was empty. No dust, no objects. Regulus clearly didn't intend to kill him right away. If he had, the spike would have pierced the throat the moment it appeared. Or, at the speed it had reached when it glowing, a casual flick would have shattered his skull. Regulus was demonstrating a point. I can take your life at any moment, without wand work you can see, without any obvious spell signs. Then, as suddenly as it began, the rotation stopped. The change from screaming rotation to absolute stillness was so instantaneous it defied physics. 1 second it shrieked and glowed, the next it hung motionless, with no inertia. The red faded, the stone cooled back to gray-white. The spike crumbled like sand in the wind, particles scattering and vanishing a few seconds later. Silence returned to the training ground. Hermes stood frozen, the wound no longer bleeding, only the sting reminding him of what had just happened. His throat was dry. His lips moved, but no sound came. Regulus waited a few seconds, then asked calmly, "Now, how do you want to duel?" Hermes took 10 seconds to steady his breathing. He wiped at the blood on his neck, fingers hovering over the shallow cut. It was only a surface wound, not even worth a proper healing charm. What he'd just seen had burned away every assumption he'd made. Chapter 117, Battle Turns into a Duel. Hermes had expected a wizarding duel between two equals, or at least one in which he could see the gap between them. Wand against 19, spell against spell, dark arts against dark arts. He had prepared tactics, contingency plans, even considered how to concede gracefully if he couldn't win. But Regulus had used a single stone spike to show him that none of those assumptions held true. In a real fight, he wouldn't even get the chance to make a move. A tangle of emotions swelled in Hermes. Resentment that years of practicing the dark arts and mastering so many lethal spells had been rendered useless before he could cast one. Reluctant acceptance that when the gap was this wide, you had no choice but to acknowledge it. And a fierce, hungry excitement at seeing a level of power completely beyond his comprehension. He wanted to know how strong Regulus was and how long it would take to catch up, even if he could only ever see Regulus's back. He forced down all other feelings, looked up, and deliberately calmed his voice, though it trembled slightly. A proper wizarding duel. Avery laughed nearby, and Alex tried to suppress a smile but failed, the corners of his mouth twitching upward. Hermes ignored them and kept his gaze fixed on Regulus. Formal terms, bow, then begin. Regulus saw no reason not to and nodded. Fine. They walked to the center of the 12 and stopped 5 meters apart. Hermes bowed first, neat, formal, back straight, head lowered, arms at his sides. Regulus returned the bow. It was shallower, but his posture was flawless, the elegance drilled into pureblood families showing through despite everything. As they rose, Hermes' nine was already raised to his chest, the tip angled slightly downward in a standard dueling stance. He didn't attack at once. He did something else first. Bubblehead charm. A transparent bubble blossomed from the tip of his nining and expanded to enclose his head. It clung close to his skin, not affecting his vision or breathing, but isolating the air around him. He remembered the suffocating feeling in the dormitory last semester. No matter how Regulus might nullify air, the bubblehead charm would at least keep his breathing clear. Transfiguration wouldn't work either. He had practiced this specifically. Regulus looked at the bubble and felt like laughing, but didn't. He let his 19 hang at his side in his right hand, raised his left hand, palm up in a casual please gesture. Avery stood by the wall and cleared his throat. Ready. Begin. The moment the words left Avery's mouth, Hermes moved 2 steps left and swung his knight out. Impedimenta! The spell flew for Regulus's chest. Hermes didn't expect to hit him, just to force a reaction. Regulus didn't move, his right hand still hung at his side. The spell came within a meter of him, struck something invisible, and popped into a scatter of pinpoint lights. Hermes frowned and kept circling, waving his 19. Leglocker Curse, Petrificus Totalis, Rictus Empra. 3 spells shot from different angles in different colors, all fast. Each met the same fate, striking an invisible barrier a meter in front of Regulus, bursting and dissipating. Regulus didn't so much as turn. As Hermes moved behind him, Regulus remained facing forward, head slightly bowed, eyes on the floor. The barrier was omnidirectional, front and back, left and right, up and down, 360 degrees with no blind spots. Hermes halted, breathing rapidly with tension and excitement, the bubble around his head expanding and contracting with each breath. Basic spells were useless. He had anticipated this and moved on to something more powerful. He inhaled deep, raised his 19 high, and began a long, oddly accented incantation, the one he was best at. Bone and blood stripping. This time the spell was more concentrated and vicious than during the first-year contest. Faster, stronger. A beam of light, dark red edging toward black and exuding a chill of pain, shot violently at Regulus. But instead of the barrier instantly manifesting as before, only a faint silver gleam appeared where the spell struck, and it eroded far more slowly. Hermes gritted his teeth and poured more 18 into the attack. The beam thickened and blackened, the spell's structure destabilizing and spitting lightning-like flickers that struck the floor, sizzling and leaving corrosive scorch marks. The barrier began to show, only a small crystal-clear panel facing him. Regulus finally moved. He turned his head toward the point of contact, nodded in satisfaction at Hermes' improvement, then raised his left hand and tapped the barrier with his index finger. The barrier flared, erupting as 8 surged from within and sent a shockwave outward from Regulus. Clang. The black beam shattered like struck metal, crumbling into points of light. The shockwave slammed into Hermes, knocking him back 3 steps. The bubblehead charm trembled violently, nearly bursting. He steadied himself, chest tight. The impact had rattled his organs. Regulus watched him with an emotionless voice. Continue. Hermes swallowed. He could feel his AT being drained. The bone and blood stripping had consumed too much and still hadn't broken the barrier. Regulus hadn't even raised his 19 and seemed utterly at ease. But Hermes had one more move, a ruthless one. He gripped his 19 tightly, thrust it forward while guarding with his left hand, and began another long, tongue-twisting incantation that tasted of darkness. The 12 chilled and dimmed. Avery and Alex by the wall hugged themselves without realizing it. Shadow binding devourment. A writhing pool of shadow formed on the ground, viscous and living. The center bulged, sending up black ribbon-like tentacles that twisted through the air, searching for a target. This summoning dark art used 18 imprints drained from dark creatures to call shadow tentacles that mimicked their attack patterns. The tentacles had substance. They could bind an enemy and continuously siphon life force and aid, leaving the victim chilled to the bone and weakened at the soul. The tentacles rose nearly 2 meters high, 7 or 8 black ribbons of varying thickness, tips like spearheads. Hermes' face was ashen. Maintaining the spell was a massive drain. He felt his 18 pour out like water through an open sluice, but he clenched his jaw and held it, pointing his 19 at Regulus with ferocious intent. The tentacles lashed out simultaneously, moving so fast they carved blurred shadows as they stabbed at Regulus from every direction. Then they froze. All the tentacles hung a meter away from Regulus, twisting futilely, tips stabbing but unable to advance. A sound came where the shadows met the barrier, and that was all. Hermes watched, wide-eyed, as the barrier revealed itself more fully, brighter than before. Then it expanded outward like a giant net, enveloping the shadow tentacles and contracting. The tentacles were crushed and deformed, howling with a sound like twisting metal. Cracks spidered across the black ribbons, widening until they shattered into fragments that fell and vanished as black smoke. One after another, The tentacles were destroyed within 2 seconds. Light returned to the 12. Warmth seeped back in. Hermes' legs folded, and he dropped to one knee, bracing on his 19 to keep from collapsing. He panted hard. The bubblehead charm trembled with his ragged breath. Sweat streamed from his forehead onto the floor. His 18 reserves were nearly empty. 2 heavy dark arts and the earlier probing spells had bled him dry. Regulus watched a beat, then spoke slowly. "That's enough." Hermes looked up. "If I let you keep using dark arts, something could go wrong," Regulus said calmly, offering him a graceful exit. For the first time he raised his 19. "I'll use one spell. Try to block it." Hermes forced himself to stand and waved his 19. The bubblehead charm dissolved. The spell had been futile against Regulus anyway. He gathered what he had left and cast the shield charm. Protego! A pale blue, semi-transparent barrier formed in front of him, its edges wavering, shape irregular. For a first year, producing a formed Protego was impressive, even if imperfect. Regulus tapped the barrier lightly with his left index finger, the repelling charm. A red light flashed out and struck Hermes' shield. The barrier shattered, exploding into countless pale blue fragments that flickered and dissolved in the air. Chapter 118. I'm impressed. Hermes froze. He recognized the repelling charm, but he never expected it could break through a shield charm. Normally, a repelling charm would be deflected or neutralized by a shield, but Regulus's spell was too powerful, so strong it shattered the barrier's structure outright. In the moment Hermes was dazed, Regulus finally flicked his wand. Incendio! A ball of white gold flame shot across the training grounds, its heat so intense the air warped as it passed. Hermes had no time to cast a second shield charm, nor the strength left to do so. He tried to dodge, but he couldn't. He covered his head with his arms and shut his eyes, certain this was the end. As the fire reached his face, it suddenly expanded, engulfing him before exploding in a brilliant flash. A blinding white light filled the practice area. Avery and Alex both shut their eyes and turned away. A heat wave hit them, but it lasted only a fraction of a second, perhaps a tenth. When the light subsided, Hermes was still standing, unharmed, but his hair was completely curled. The straight black hair he'd always worn had been transformed into a mass of fluffy ringlets. The tips smelled of singe and gave off faint wisps of blue smoke. Soot marked his face, and his robes were dusted with ash, though the fabric hadn't caught fire. He reached up, stopped when his fingers met the curled tips, and then lowered his hand. The training grounds were silent for a few seconds. Avery was the first to burst into laughter, doubling over in an exaggerated way. Alex followed more quietly, a hand over his mouth. Hermes did not laugh. He stood frozen, staring at Regulus for a long time. Then he walked over, stood beside Avery and Alex, and turned to face Regulus in the center of the grounds. He had conceded. He was beaten and, in spirit, would follow him from now on. Regulus put his wand away and walked over to them. "That's all for today," he said flatly, as if nothing remarkable had happened. "Go eat. We have class this afternoon." The four left the room of requirement, and the door closed behind them. The corridor was empty. It was already lunchtime. On the way to the Great Hall, Avery excitedly rehashed the fight. "Did you see that stone spike? It was practically glowing red." "Incendio can be used like that? I thought it would just set Hermes on fire." Alex echoed him in a low voice, but kept glancing at Hermes. Hermes walked in silence, occasionally touching his curled hair, his face unreadable. Regulus watched him and could feel the small thorn of defiance in Hermes' heart had been plucked out. As Regulus had intended, a display of overwhelming power and total suppression was the simplest, most effective method. Still, fighting Hermes hadn't even counted as a warm-up. Regulus felt no confusion or doubt. He understood the gap between them. It wasn't only skill or knowledge, it was a fundamental difference in power. When two wizards are on very different levels, combat can be almost ceremonious. Like an adult facing a child, no extravagant technique is necessary. One can win simply by standing still. It had been like that in Nocturne Alley. He stood, cast, and his opponents fell. But dueling his father, Orion, had been different. With Orion, he had to move constantly, anticipate, employ tactics. Spells had to be precise, defenses tight, counterattacks decisive. Orion was higher than him, but not untouchably so. Regulus wondered, briefly, whether truly powerful people like Dumbledore or Lord Voldemort would find fighting him as easy as he had found fighting Hermes. The thought circled once, and he dismissed it. There was no point in pondering. The answer, he knew, would be no. By late March, the weather at Hogwarts had warmed. Most of the snow around the castle had melted. Tender green shoots pushed up through the grass, and the ice along the edge of the Black Lake had thinned. Occasionally, the giant squid would break the surface with a tentacle for air. In Transfiguration class, Professor McGonagall was teaching an advanced demonstration, transforming inanimate objects into living ones, turning a carved wooden bird into a real bird that could fly and sing. The key lies in understanding the boundary between the living and the non-living, she said, standing at the lectern and waving her wand. A wooden carving on the table trembled, feathers sprouted along the grain, and dull wooden eyes brightened. Transfiguration cannot create life. It grants morphological and functional vitality. Note that transfigured creatures do not possess true souls. Their behavior is entirely driven by magical energy. She completed the transformation, and the bird took flight from the table, circled the classroom once, then landed on the windowsill and sang. Its song was crisp and its wing beats strong, but close observation revealed the motions were repetitive. Every 3 circles it made the same turn, and every 5 chirps there was a pause. "Now, begin your practice," Professor McGonagall said. "1 wooden carving per person. Finish before the bell. Remember, the focus is on the feeling of life, not only appearance." The wood carvings began to change around the room, surfaces acquiring a sheen, grains splitting into fine feather patterns. Sizes swelled slightly, wings unfolded, talons separated from bases. 2 pinpricks of yellow light appeared in some eyes. Heads turned, and soft cooing sounds issued forth. When finished, the carved pieces were living birds, in appearance at least, wings layered, feathers defined. Regulus's carving transformed into an owl that hopped onto the desk and tilted its head at him. Its wings spanned half a meter and showed clear feather structure. Professor McGonagall walked over, inspected it, and reached out to touch a wing. The feathers were soft and springy. She had the owl fly. It circled twice, then landed on Regulus's shoulder and used its beak to preen its own feathers. "Perfect." She nodded, stern-faced but approving. "Complete form, ample vitality, natural motion. 10 points to Slytherin." Regulus inclined his head. "Thank you, Professor." The surrounding Slytherin and Ravenclaw students had grown used to such displays. They glanced at the owl before returning to their projects. Regulus raised his hand, and the owl flew to his arm. He could feel the rhythm of the magical energy within it, a stable circulating structure maintaining the transfiguration effect. When the bell rang, most students had managed the basic transformation. Their carvings moved and chirped, but the details were crude, the motions jerky, the sounds like 2 pieces of wood rubbing. Only a few had done well, and Regulus's was the best. People packed their things and left. Avery, Alex, and Hermes looked toward Regulus. He remained seated, still watching the owl. The 3 shared a look, said nothing, picked up their bags, and left. At first, they had waited after class for Regulus, but his conversations with professors had grown longer and longer, so they stopped waiting. The classroom emptied. Professor McGonagall was tidying her desk when she looked up and found Regulus still there, her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Mr. Black, come to my office," she said. Regulus stood, and the owl returned to his shoulder. He followed her through the corridor into McGonagall's office, a spacious, tidy room lined with bookshelves stuffed with heavy tomes on magical theory. A gentle fire burned in the hearth. Parchment, ink, and a quill lay on the large desk. Several moving paintings hung on the walls, a cat chasing a butterfly, a mouse nibbling cheese, and a view of Hogwarts at night with stars drifting across the canvas. Professor McGonagall sat behind the desk and gestured to the chair opposite. "Have you mastered the notes?" she asked, folding her hands. "I've memorized them," Regulus replied modestly. "I'm still practicing." He took 2 items from his pocket, a clear, sparkling diamond and a piece of grayish-black slate. He raised his wand and tapped the diamond lightly. The crystal responded. Its transparent lattice contracted inward, molecules rearranged. The color shifted from clear to grayish-black. The texture softened, and a layered grain appeared across the surface. The diamond had become slate. He tapped it again, and the slate reversed. The layers collapsed, the structure rebuilt into a three-dimensional network. The color shifted back to transparent, the texture hardened. The slate turned back into a diamond. The process was smooth and stable, no leakage of magical energy, no flickering from structural instability, no glitches in the transformation. The diamond and slate shifted back and forth on the desk with quiet precision. Professor McGonagall watched, approval deepening in her eyes. She could see Regulus had not only memorized the notes, but had put in substantial practice.